Connectivity is the key to the future of Qatar, a vision realized by the ultra-modern Hamad International Airport, crowned best in the world in 2019, and host to more than 30 million travelers before the pandemic. World-class infrastructure underpins everything. Its connected business ecosystem includes the Qatar Financial Center, the tech startups at Qatar Science and Technology Park, and the free zones of Ras Bufontas and Al Hul.
We have two free zones, one next to the airport, which is focused more on the air business, and we have the south one, which is next to the port, which is more focused on industrial and maritime business.
The major factor to choose QFZ to develop our enterprise, it is first the fact that it's a free zone concept with a special tax regime. Secondly, it is also very close to airport and a first-class seaport.
We have advanced regulations, we have advanced system, and we are using the technology, and we are putting our resources to create partnerships.
They can provide you temporary facility in order for you to start your operation before you develop and build your final factory.
We are offering one of the best solutions for business and international trade route to come to Qatar and to use our facility here to store their business, to move their product from their country to Qatar and from Qatar to the world.
I think that all the companies who want to establish themselves here can consider the QFZ setup as a real asset.
Since the start of the 21st century, there has been one macro trend to underpin them all. The center of economic gravity has been shifting discernibly from west to east. The Qatar Economic Forum in June convenes many of the most influential business leaders and policymakers to help create the blueprint for the next chapter of growth. There has never been a more important time to come together and have the big conversations.
A SARS-like virus which has infected hundreds in China.
COVID-19 is spreading faster in India.
Europe is now the epicenter.
The UK tonight acknowledged it's losing its battle.
And more than 3 million people have died.
Has now reached the United States.
The United Kingdom has become the first country to approve the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine.
The coronavirus pandemic has tanked the global economy.
It's worse for a single quarter than we ever saw during the Great Recession.
4.4 million people filing for initial jobless claims.
Around 50 countries have begun vaccination programs against COVID-19.
Other countries will have to wait a while longer.
Outrage at the death of George Floyd.
Demonstrations, riots, and violence from coast to coast.
The events in Washington have taken a violent and tumultuous turn.
Israeli airstrikes flattened 3 apartment buildings in Gaza City.
Administration's ambitious climate agenda. The change here is just monumental.
Coast to coast, signs of reopening.
Hundreds of families separated by COVID-19 were reunited at last.
Welcome back to the Qatar Economic Forum, powered by Bloomberg. We begin this session with a simple question. Are choke points and bottlenecks clogging up the arteries of trade flows? Geopolitical tensions are a major source of worry. The security of trade routes is another. Nations and regions whose economies depend on trade may well see their coffers dwindling if the threats grow. One example is right here in the Middle East. After a regional GDP decline of 3.9% this year, the World Bank forecasts a 2.4% rebound in economic growth. But that recovery will depend on seamless trade flows threatened by growing nationalism and protectionism. I'd like to welcome Bloomberg's Simone Foxman and Qatar's Minister of Commerce and Industry and Acting Minister of Finance for his views on the challenges he faces in trading with a world where barriers are replacing bridges.
We are here with His Excellency Aliko, the Minister of Commerce and Industry and the Acting Finance Minister for the State of Qatar. Thank you so much, Excellency, for being with us. I'm going to cut right to the chase. We want to know more about the arrest of the Finance Minister last month. Can you tell us any more about what the allegations were? This was such a big event for Qatar and for the region, frankly.
Thank you, Simon. It gives me a great pleasure to be with you today. As all over the news, the previous finance minister there was an order of arrest by the Attorney General, and he is under investigation, for possible charges related possibly to corruptions and abuse of power. Now, mentioning this, these are investigations, and we don't know the detail of these investigations and how long it will take and what will be the outcome of these investigations as we go along. But I must emphasize one thing, as speaking about this, that, His Highness the Emir had made it very clear that, the country will run in the highest standard of transparency, governance, and compliance. And I must say also emphasize that, Qatari institutions enjoys the highest standard of transparency, compliance and governance, and we don't see any issues, with this one, because all the organizations are run to the best standards, business as usual, and people come and go as we speak. What I can say about the investigations, we will see the outcome, and we should, hear the results once we have concrete, results in this one.
Well, that's the question I get from investors is, will we know what happens either way? Will we know kind of what the issues were?
Absolutely. Qatar runs in a very transparent legal system. And once we have the full details, of the investigations and the outcome of these investigations, I'm sure, the public, the media will be able to know what's going on and what will be the next steps.
Mm-hmm. You're acting finance minister now. Any chance you'll remain in that role?
Well, what I say, His Highness gave the confidence in me, to run both files, the finance as well as my existing file, commerce and industry, and I'm ready to carry, the positions or whatever the positions the government see suitable for me going forward. So I'm just focusing in the functions and the files I have, and to do a good job in the files I have, and I have no clear visibility in what's going to happen.
Okay, sounds good. Well, do let us know.
For the time being, you are dealing with the two ministers.
Fair enough. Before you came into the finance ministry, there was an update put out essentially saying that Qatar did not need to raise any more debt this year. Is that something that you agree with, or do you think you'll tap the markets again?
Yes. Let me tell you, first of all, when we did the budget and we ran the budget, we ran in a very conservative numbers, which was $40 a barrel in oil. And, giving that conservative position, that the expectation was around 34 billion riyals of deficit for the year. However, we had an excellent quarter, the first quarter. Oil prices, moved in the right directions, and, we had an average of year to date around $64 a barrel. This resulted, on a surplus of 0.2 billion riyals for the first quarter. And this is actually, it was a mix of control expenditure as well as, improved revenues. Looking, to the remainder of the year, should this situation continues, we should be in a good position. The only time we might need finance just to improve our financial position, or in terms of like if we have an opportunity for debt, like cheaper debt, in the right price.
Yeah, yields are so low right now, know.
So, only to be opportunistic. But, from a deficit and from a budget perspective, if the situation continues, we should be in good situation.
Yeah, I want to understand this going forward too, because Bank of America predicts that GDP here could double essentially on the back of that LNG capacity expansion by 2027. You might not need to raise debt in the future, but Qatar's position is well liked by the market.
Yes. Deficit usually trigger debts. This is the usual situation. But also spending and expansion trigger debt as well. So it will depend. And again, being opportunistic. This is what I was mentioning earlier. So being opportunistic about raising debt and refinancing an existing expensive debt. So we're going to be debt management has to be looked, separately. But in terms of GDP, you are right. Looks like we are in good shape for the expansion of the oil and gas. This is going to happen in a phased manner, 2024 to 2027, and GDP should have a strong post at that stage. And we should benefit from that post to invest basically in the economy, to invest also, with QIA and enhance our position.
Is a value-added tax still on the table?
Well, as you know, some GCC countries already started, implementation. We're looking at it, but we don't have a date for this as of yet. Okay. But this is normal. I think many countries do reforms, and it's very important for us to diversify the revenues, not to be so dependent on oil and gas. So we have to, one of the streams we're going to be looking at is really the VAT and enhance the tax regime in the country.
Let's talk a little bit more about reforms generally. You have been, I know we've spoken about, you're particularly supportive of reforms to make the labor market more flexible, yes. Particularly changing jobs without employee permission. There has been some pushback on this from the highest legislative bodies, the Shura Council. Do you foresee this going backwards?
Well, there is no change to that position. Just to confirm this, maybe there was a comment here and there, which was a normal and even a reaction in the public, among the public, to this regulations. But the government, is very decisive when it comes to the labor market reform. So all the reforms announced are going as planned. Sometimes, some regulations, you announce the big picture, the big news, but there are some details, into these ones. And these details is very important from regulations and to protect the worker as well as the businesses going along. So there are so many details in this one. But when it comes to the non-objection certificate, the kafala system, the exit visa, all these reforms, Qatar has, announced it and committed to it.
So moving forward, even if there is pushback from some parts of the business sector, are there any other reforms that you want to see happen soon?
Yes. Well, looking to the future Qatar, our priority here is diversification, and this is in line with our national vision, 2030. So we are pushing, in terms of and when I say diversification, we are going to be focusing on 3 areas. FDI, foreign direct investment, and in that area we created the IPA, the investment promotion agencies, and again, we have enhanced, clusters, business clusters, like we have announced, the QFC, the Qatar Financial Center, where Bloomberg is residing today, and also the media cities coming up. We have the Qatar Free Zone, already up and running. The second thing is really enabling the private sector. And in that area, we have launched in 2020 the PPP, law, which is basically talks about how we can enable the private sector and make them participate and move away from government-led, economy to a more private-led economy. So that's another thing we're doing. And the third area is really the business environment and the ease of doing business in Qatar. And we have many reforms, just to look to where we do business. We have announced, a law on 100% foreign ownership in businesses. Recently, the the Council of Ministers, they have announced also 100% ownership in all listed companies. Now it's allowed, and some companies already announced that they will move in that direction. So we are moving with these reforms and making sure the business environment is going to be very attractive in terms of diversification. Also, at the same time, we're identifying which sectors are going to be for the diversification. We're going to be focusing on, moving to the National Vision 2030.
Do you see the rise of investor activism from Europe, the United States in particular, around ESG? Do you see that impacting the way that Qatar develops and the way the business climate goes?
Well, to the contrary, I think Qatar is very well positioned, when it comes to the ESG. And I must say, first of all, in terms of ESG, we talked about the gas expansion, we're doing in terms of uplifting the production by 50% in a phased manner. And we believe, the LNG is a clean energy and it's going to be the medium, term, energy, tool for the world. So investing in that, seems to be very, very, very convenient. And we understand that the oil is going to be, under challenge in this one.
Qatar has lost about 6.4% of its population. I know it's important to you to bring in foreign high-tech workers, skilled workers, knowledge economy workers. Do you think that the country is going fast enough?
Yeah, well, as I say, at the moment, what happened in the last few years, we were focusing so much more in the infrastructure and the construction. And usually this brings, a different kind of population, which is the blue-collar workers, which are okay, but in terms of economic return, it's not as good, of course, as when you get to the white collar. Now, our diversification is built around building the white-collar workers in Qatar and changing the mix, the population mix going forward. And once we finish with the World Cup, we should see, a reduction on the construction projects and more economic-intensive projects, like in the manufacturing, in the technology, in the innovation side, in the food hub, in the logistics. And that's automatically should, trigger, a white-collar population. And also we have done some reforms in terms of the real estate ownerships, which encourage and what they call the permanent visa system. And this should encourage, change, the population mix.
Everyone's going for this top talent across the GCC. How do you bring in these workers when, there's such competition from Dubai, Saudi Arabia now trying to pull workers to Riyadh in particular?
Yes. Well, competition is good, makes you work harder. That's for sure. But we believe we are very well positioned here in Qatar. The environment is very attractive environment. We enjoy the best infrastructure. We enjoy, in terms of the economy, the services, the environment, the business environment is very competitive. And we have done very well in terms of improving the environment, improving, the setup in Qatar. And we believe we are in a position, our reforms are good and fast, to attract and to be, competitive also with our, regional neighbors. And sometimes we can complement each other, because, businesses, I think with the GCC, we should look at it also where we can see so it doesn't have to be who takes, or who fights for the talents, but you can share talents because sometimes businesses are big and we are sufficient and we have a proximity and, the GCC system, works very well.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us at the Qatar Economic Forum. His Excellency Ali Al-Kuwari, the Minister of Commerce and Industry, and also the Acting Finance Minister for the State of Qatar.
Joining me now is Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the Director General of the World Trade Organization. Madam Director General, it's so good to see you after such a long time. Thank you so much for being with us. Let me start by asking you, what do you see as the three biggest challenges of the WTO?
Well, thank you, Zain. It's great to see you. I think let me start with the first one, I think, is for the WTO to be seen to be relevant to today's problems, to solving the issues of the day. And I'll just take the pandemic, for example. I think the WTO and trade is very relevant to helping us get out of this pandemic. Trade has already been instrumental in getting medical goods and supplies around the world, has been resilient. You know, even though trade fell by 7% in value last year in 2020, trade in medical goods and supplies actually rose by 16%. And it's WTO rules that underpin all this trade and make for stability and predictability. So, and for the pandemic, the WTO's monitoring function, which includes looking at export restrictions and prohibitions and all the things that might impinge on the supply chain for goods, inputs and outputs, goods for making vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. That's a very important function, because if the export restrictions are not dealt with, then you can have blocks in the way of increasing and scaling up the supply of medical products, especially vaccines. So that's the first. And the WTO is very relevant to that. I think the second is restoring the WTO's negotiating function and making it lead to wins. The WTO has not had a successful multilateral negotiation for some time. And we have in front of us now the fisheries subsidies negotiations, which is designed to deliver Sustainable Development Goal 14.6, the sustainability of our oceans and our fisheries. This has been going on for 20 years. I think concluding it will mean a big success for the WTO and will bring back the negotiating function. Among other types of negotiations the WTO can deliver. And finally, on the dispute settlement function, the WTO is unique in having a place where all members, all countries in the world can bring their trade disputes. And this system, the dispute settlement system, has been paralyzed for some time due to disagreements between members on how it should work. We need to reform and restore this and reinvigorate it. And I think these are the three big challenges we really need to solve at this time.
The momentum toward globalization was already being slowed before the pandemic. In terms of trade going forward, how do you think that this momentum can pick up? Will it?
Yes, Zain, I think you're right that momentum was slowing, and that was because in the period between the 1990s to say 2005, we had a unique period in the globalization story in which China, the East European countries, they were all, sort of integrating into the global economy and into trade. So there was a very big momentum. You also had periods of really important cases of liberalization by members of the WTO. So there was a big impetus to trade and to globalization during that time. So before the pandemic, as you said, it started slowing down. And of course, with the pandemic, we've seen, the negative growth rates of trade, as I just mentioned, with respect to last year. But let's look at it this way. I believe that trade will come back. Perhaps the growth trend will be lower than what we have seen in the past. But I still believe that there's a opportunity and momentum, because let's look at globalization. You know, some people say that there's a de-globalization going on, but I prefer to think of a re-globalization in which those parts of the world that were left behind and those peoples that were excluded during this period of fast globalization will be brought back in. There are some continents like the African continent, you know, the trade for Africa as a percentage of global trade is just 2 to 3%. We can reintegrate the continent, reintegrate poorer countries who are not part of this globalization, reintegrate people who were marginalized. And this can be part of bringing the globalization back and bringing trade back as well.
You are sitting right in the middle of a hot debate right now, the potential waiving of intellectual property rights in vaccine production and distribution. What is your personal perspective on this issue?
Zain, yes, we do have an important debate and potentially negotiations going on at the WTO among members. Let me begin with this. The fact that there's such vaccine inequity around the world, inequity of access, a situation in which you have, let's say, 3 doses per 100 people on the African continent that has been administered and up to 71 in developed countries. It's just not acceptable. So I just think that this vaccine inequity doesn't work. It's to the benefit of the whole world to have everyone vaccinated so we can all come out of the pandemic. Let me begin with that. But with specific reference to the debate on the IP waiver, you know, as Director General of the organization, I have members on both sides of that debate. So I cannot offer, my job is really to try and bring members together, not really to have a personal opinion. But I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that our members come together, start to negotiate text. And I'm happy to say that the meeting of the TRIPS Council last week, members did agree to start looking at the revised text that the proponents, many developing countries, have put on the table. The EU also put a proposal on the table, and they're going to be looking at all that. My hope and expectation is that this will happen quickly because lives are at stake, so that by July we begin to see some pragmatic solutions that will allow developing countries automaticity of access to vaccines, whilst at the same time re-energizing or making sure we don't disincentivize research and innovation.
One key issue that we're all talking about as a global priority is climate change as well, and the rising socioeconomic inequities. And they're really bringing into sharp focus the issues of sustainable development. What role do you see WTO playing in this sector?
Well, first of all, let me say that on the issue of biodiversity, for instance, WTO is playing a big role. I mentioned the fisheries subsidies negotiations, where we're trying to support the biodiversity of our oceans. So that's the first point. On climate change, issues of incentivizing the use of climate-friendly goods and services is very, very important. So trade in renewables, encouraging that. We had a negotiation going on environmental goods and services, which stopped in 2016. I hope we can revive that. We also have discussions going on plastics pollution and how we are going to approach that from the trade side. I think that is very important. So these are some of the ways. Of course, the whole issue of carbon emissions and possible global carbon tax. These are issues we're all looking at to see how that would work.
And I have to ask you this because it's an important question for me and for women and our whole African continent, in fact. What does it mean to you personally, as well as the world, on your election as the first woman and the first African to be Director General of the World Trade Organization? You know how proud we are of you.
Well, thank you. I feel very humble. First of all, credit goes to the members for electing me. So they are the ones who made history. Second of all, it's wonderful to be first woman, first African, but I think the most important thing is the competence. The WTO faces many challenges, and I always said to the members when I was competing, select the most competent person to solve these challenges. And I'm glad they did. I hope I can rise up to the challenge. I'm trying to do my best. And well, Zain, let me say this. The day when we stop making history by being the first woman and the first African, that's when I'll really feel comfortable, because this shouldn't be history anymore. Women should be in places just because they have the competence to be. Africans should be leaders because they're competent to be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zain.
I'm Tom Keenan. It is the Qatar Economic Forum in a most unusual time as we escape from a pandemic. So many parts of the world still in pandemic. But nevertheless, it is good news into the end of 2021. It's bad news for me that we only have a 9-minute discussion with Peter Mandelson. Lord Mandelson, of course, is public service to the United Kingdom, and far more than that, after his public service for Blair, Brown, and others, very active in some of the issues of the global economy and our global politics as well. Lord Mandelson, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg at this Qatar Economic Forum.
Pleasure to be with you.
Well, wonderful to have you with us. I need to go across the aisle to the conservative Johnson, who is selling a trade idea for Britain, and it's been percolating in Brexit after Brexit, and that is global Britain, the idea that there will be a new Britain that will trade worldwide. Tell us of your optimism that Britain can find a new globalization.
Well, of course, Britain has always traded worldwide, but what we've done is to do so with the weight and muscle of the European Union and its giant single market and trading bloc behind us. Now, having left the European Union, obviously, we are giving up that weight and we're giving up that muscle. But the theory is that what we're acquiring instead of weight is nimbleness, that we can negotiate trade agreements with counterparties in a faster way, a more flexible way, and without having to take into consideration all the competing interests and demands of 27 other member states of the European Union. And that's a perfectly good theory. And of course, we've now inked in an in-principle agreement between Britain and Australia, for example. It hasn't yet been completed. There's an awful lot still to be negotiated as it happens. But I would just make this point to you, Tom. Sometimes speed in trade negotiation, and I speak as a former trade commissioner for the European Union, sometimes speed in trade negotiation can be the enemy of what's good, let alone perfect, because you're so keen on getting a political result that you sort of skip over the detail and you don't force the result on your terms that you might otherwise be able to do if you go in a slightly slower and more pedantic way. So, yes, you can be more flexible, but sometimes it's as well to show your counterparty that you are prepared to slow things up, that you're even prepared to walk away from a trade negotiation if necessary. And we've got to show that. Otherwise, what we will end up is optical trade agreements, political trade agreements, rather than those with real content and real substance.
One of the most difficult interviews I've had this year was with Lord Patton, actually a set of interviews. And of course, this touches upon the United Kingdom and the new events, the new political economy, and certainly the new politics of Hong Kong as well. You've provided real leadership looking at Great Britain and looking at China. Let's start, first of all, with a general statement on how the United Kingdom must approach China, the new Great Britain and the new China.
Well, I think what you're seeing across the West, I mean, the United States, but also the European Union and its member states, but also additionally Britain, is a rethinking, a recalibration of our relationship with China. That doesn't mean to say that we're turning against China, that we want to contain or defeat China, but nonetheless, there is a feeling that we need to give more weight to issues to do with human rights, the rule of law, but also that in our trade relationship, we need to be playing on a more even playing field. And I personally support that. But, we're not just trade competitors with China. We are also multilateral partners with China, for example, on climate change, as well as I say, geopolitical rivals. So, there are different facets to this relationship. And I think that whilst we are rethinking and recalibrating, I don't believe this will mean that either in Europe as a whole or in Great Britain, we will go as far as the United States might want us to do in completely rethinking that relationship with China.
I am fascinated, and this, of course, is with your politics of the left and a new left, if you will, the dynamics of domestic United Kingdom politics. Peter Mandelson on what the British banks should do in Hong Kong. And I mean this within the Qatar Economic Forum, a broader view, not so much the actual mechanism of banking in Hong Kong. We see Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC, move so much over to Hong Kong. But what would be your counsel of what the British financial system should do when they see a new Hong Kong?
The British financial system has to do business in Asia as a whole, in China in particular, and of course that includes Hong Kong. And naturally, we don't make the laws in those countries in Asia, and certainly not in China or Hong Kong. We have to abide by the laws that are locally made, even if there are many aspects of them with which we disagree. But it's unthinkable for us simply to pull stumps and walk away from Hong Kong. We're not prepared to do that. But we have signed up to an agreement, as you know, when we handed over Hong Kong to China from British rule, that saw Hong Kong incrementally move more and more into the orbit of mainland China. That doesn't mean to say that we have no further interest in democracy and the rule of law in Hong Kong. We will express our views, but we have to be realistic because we have signed up to that handover. We did so many years ago, and we have to live with that.
Lord Mandelson, and one final question, if I could, and I'm embarrassed at the short conversation. You and I could go for hours here. There's so many good events to speak of. And that is the theme of this economic forum, which is on the supply constraints, the shock of a pandemic that's out there. Do you see a permanence to the supply dislocations so many of our attendees are living?
No, I don't. I think what the experience of the pandemic has taught us is that overwhelmingly global supply chains are resilient. They've served us well. They've not broken down. And I believe that they will continue to underpin the global economy for decades to come. That doesn't mean to say that in some respects we will want to make certain adjustments. There are certain areas where we want to diversify supply and not be reliant on one single source. There may be some areas too where we want to bring production closer to home so that logistically those supply chains are more reliable. I know some people are saying that we should onshore or literally bring home. Well, it's worth looking at in certain areas, but in the main, I think we have to recognize that global supply chains have served us well, and they will continue to do so. They serve everyone's interests in the world. They grow trade, grow economic prosperity, and of course, employment across the world. And that, of course, serves all our interests and not just some.
Peter Mandelson, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg and our Qatar Economic Forum.
Great pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Joining me now is Aliko Dangote, founder, president, and CEO of the Dangote Group. Aliko, it's so great to see you. It's been a very long time. Thank you so much for being with us on this program. Let me start by asking you, how has the Dangote Group navigated the pandemic?
Well, thank you very much, Zen. Well, the Dangote Group really navigated very, very well, because what we did was actually, first of all, the safety of our people is very, very key and very important to us. So we made sure that everything was done perfectly well, during the pandemic, to make sure the safety of our people is put in place. And, we did quite a lot of innovations where, we made sure that, we focus on our own supply chain. And then apart from focusing on our supply chain, we made sure that, we cut cost and to make sure that everything turns out to be okay. So at the end of the day, the result was that we did much better. In the cement business, we did 37% more than 2019 in terms of profit after tax, and then we did about 35% in the food business, after tax, our profit after tax. So when you look at this, really, we thought we were actually going to go into the negative during the 2020 results, but we came out much better because of all the innovation we put in place.
What kind of innovation? Could you give us an example of maybe one of the things you did?
Well, one of the things that we did actually, was to make sure that we, the supply chain was done perfectly so that there won't be any disruptions. Because if you remember, there are quite a lot of lockdowns all over the place. So we needed to make sure no disruption in our supplies. And then, the market also went up. The demand of our goods, went up because we were able to supply our goods right on time and also to satisfy the customers. So with that, really, it gave us a lot of, headroom to make sure that we did a lot of volume, and that actually translated into making more money.
What kind of investments are you making in Africa right now?
Well, right now in Africa, we're making quite a lot of investments, totaling about $19 billion. We are doing the single largest refinery of 650,000 barrels per day, which is almost 1/3 of Nigeria's production. And we'll produce all sorts of, kerosene, aviation fuel, all the, this. And so when we finish, we'll be able to supply Nigeria fully, and we'll be able to also supply the other countries in sub-Saharan Africa with their petroleum, demands. But why are we doing that? We're doing that because if you look at it, the sub-Saharan African countries, all of them, they import what they consume in terms of petroleum products. And that's why we believe that it is totally necessary, for us to make sure that, yes, we actually take out this burden of importation of petroleum products by now putting up this big size of, refinery. Then we have the other one, which is the petrochemical. We are doing polypropylene and polyethylene to the tune of 1.35 million metric tons, which will satisfy all the demands of the sub-Saharan African, countries in terms of polypropylene, polyethylene. The third one we are doing is the fertilizer, which is urea, 3 million tons. Is going to be the only urea plant in the sub-Saharan African countries, which will be able to supply to all the other major consumers within the within the sub-Saharan African continent. So that can actually help to boost our agriculture, and we don't really have delays in terms of supply of our own urea demands. The fourth one is the port. We had to build a mini port, which can take about 4 ships to be able to bring in goods and also be able to transport goods out for exports.
Well, where are you intending to export the fertilizer?
Well, the export of fertilizer, you don't believe that our first shipment, which will happen by end of June, beginning of July, is going to Louisiana in the United States of America. But majority of our export is going to be in, Brazil. Brazil will take majority of our supplies. So apart from meeting the domestic demands, we are now going to be able to earn quite a lot of money exporting the goods to the South American countries.
Let's focus our conversation a little bit now as well on the continent itself, on the intra-African trade. And the really big deal in Africa is the African Free Trade Continental Area Agreement. Could you tell us a little bit about why it's so important and whether you think it will give Africa a real boost?
Well, then definitely it is going to give Africa, the AFCTA will actually create the largest free trade area in the world. You have to get that, measured by the number of participating countries, because you have 54 countries that will be participating, and also you have a population of 1.3 billion people. So this will actually create quite a lot. And as you know, we have a combined GDP of about 3.4 trillion as of today. The bust will come within the next about 5 to 10 years, where now we are going to move from the intra-trade of only 16% to now 52%. If you look at it, even Asia is 59% and Europe is 68%. So this will actually help in terms of creating a lot of jobs, because by 2034, as you know, we will have about 1.1 billion working class, by that period. So I think this will actually help to boost the economy of all the African countries. The smaller countries where they actually don't have their markets, they now have a market. So that's what we are actually looking at.
And just briefly, Alhaji, what do you think the most important thing anyone looking at Africa today from an investment standpoint should understand about the continent? You've talked about the CFTA, the potential opportunities that exist. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us as a final thought?
I think as a final thought, in Africa, you need to look at first, agriculture. We have 60% of the world's arable land where we can actually, grow a lot of food and, export, where majority of other countries, they actually run short of land. We have the best climate. We can grow almost anything. So what we are now trying to do is to focus on manufacturing and agriculture. These are our strengths in Africa. So I believe we can do quite a lot by feeding the world, the sky is the limit. Apart from that, we will now go into, because a lot of countries in Africa, they have a lot of gas reserves. So when you look at that, it will help us to now do a lot of, polypropylene, polyethylene, all the petrochemicals. So we can be a hub in terms of supplying the world with their LNG, with their, petrochemicals needs.
Aliko Dangote, thank you so much. Really great to see you. Great to speak to you, Alhaji. I hope it's in person one day very soon. Thank you. Asante.
Thank you very much, Zen. Thank you.
We move on now to a special session where 4 world leaders share their unique insights on the state of the world. From Turkey to the continent of Africa, we find out what they think is wrong with the world and how to set it right. We start with President Erdogan of the Republic of Turkey.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Aziz kardeşim, Katar Emiri Şeyh Temim, kıymetli devlet ve hükümet başkanları, saygıdeğer misafirler, sizleri şahsım ve milletim adına en kalbi duygularımla selamlıyor. Katar Ekonomik Forumu'nun hayırlara vesile olmasını diliyorum. Toplantıya çevrim içi olarak ev sahipliği yapan, başta aziz kardeşim Şeyh Temim olmak üzere tüm Katar makamlarına teşekkür ediyorum. Koronavirüs salgını sebebiyle son 1,5 yıldır küresel ekonomi sancılı, sınamalar ve belirsizliklerle dolu meşakkatli bir süreçten geçiyor. Son asrın en büyük sağlık krizi olarak nitelenen bu salgın, aşı konusunda yaşanan onca ilerlemeye rağmen dalgalar ve yeni varyantlar halinde ülkemizi etkilemeyi sürdürüyor. 2020 yılına dair ekonomik veriler dünyamızın nasıl bir girdabın içinde olduğunu göstermeye yeterlidir. Mesela 2020 yılında dünya ekonomisi %3,5 küçülmüş, küresel ticaret %10'a yakın daralmıştır. Uluslararası doğrudan yatırımlar %42 azalırken 90 milyondan fazla insan aşırı yoksulluk sınırının altına düşmüştür. Küresel borç toplamı 282 trilyon dolara ulaşarak tarihin en yüksek seviyesini gördü. Gıda fiyatları ve metal fiyatları dünya çapında son 10 yılın rekorunu kırdı. Bilhassa küresel sistemin çeperinde yer alan az gelişmiş ve gelişmekte olan ülkeler salgın karşısında adeta kaderlerine terk edildi. Aynı kayıtsızlığın salgına karşı en önemli silahımız olan aşı meselesinde de sergilendiğine şahit oluyoruz. Dünyanın 100'e yakın ülkesinin halen ilk doz aşıya dahi ulaşamadığı vahim bir tabloyla karşı karşıyayız. Üstelik yapılan analizler 2023 yılına kadar 85 yoksul ülkenin aşıya erişim imkanı bulamayacağını işaret ediyor. İnsanlık olarak bize büyük bir aile olduğumuzu tekrar hatırlatan salgın ne yazık ki küresel dayanışma açısından bir fırsata tahvil edilemedi. Aşı ve ilaç adil bir şekilde tüm ülkelerin kullanımına açılmadıkça küresel ekonomik canlanmanın da mümkün olmayacağını biliyoruz. Türkiye olarak bu hassas dönemde sorumluluk üstlenmekten kaçınmadık. Dost kara günde belli olur diyerek 158 ülke ve 12 uluslararası kuruluşa tıbbi malzeme desteğinde bulunduk. Bir taraftan farklı kaynaklardan temin ettiğimiz aşıları vatandaşlarımıza uygularken, diğer taraftan da henüz aşıya ulaşamamış dost ve kardeş ülkelere yardımcı olmaya çalışıyoruz. Katıldığımız tüm platformlarda aşı meselesinin yeni adaletsizliklere yol açmaması gerektiğinin altını çiziyoruz. Yıl sonuna doğru kullanıma hazır hale getirmeyi planladığımız milli aşı çalışmalarımızı da bu hassasiyette yürütüyoruz. Türkiye'nin geliştirdiği Covid-19 aşısının inşallah milletimizle birlikte tüm insanlığın da aşısı olacağının müjdesini buradan paylaşmak istiyorum. Burada giderek küresel boyut kazanan ırkçılık virüsüne de değinmekte fayda görüyorum. Salgın sadece ekonomik adaletsizlikleri derinleştirmekte kalmamış, aynı zamanda İslam düşmanlığı ve göçmen karşıtlığını da alevlendirmiştir. Bugün birçok batılı ülkede kültürel ırkçılık, farklı dinden, inançtan, renkten olana tahammülsüzlük, koronavirüsten daha tehlikeli bir hal almıştır. İstatistikler, buzdağının sadece görünen kısmı olsa dahi sorunun ulaştığı boyutları ortaya koymaktadır. Batı'da ırkçı ve İslam düşmanı saldırılar son 5 yıl içinde %250, bu saldırılarda hayatı kaybedenlerin oranı ise %700 artmıştır. Camilere, derneklere, Müslümanlara ait iş yerlerine, Müslüman kadın ve gençlere yönelik ırkçı eylemlerin de tırmandığını görüyoruz. 2019 yılında Yeni Zelanda'nın Christchurch şehrinde 51 kardeşimizi bizden koparan vahşi saldırının yaraları henüz kapanmamışken 2 hafta önce Kanada'da gerçekleşen benzer bir terör eyleminin haberini aldık. Sokakta yürüyen Müslüman bir aile, İslam ve insanlık düşmanı bir terörist tarafından alçakça katledildi. Irkçı terör saldırıları sadece Müslümanları değil, Musevileri, Afrikalıları, Asya kökenlileri, Romanları da hedef alıyor. Ancak uluslararası medya ve insan hakları örgütleri bu tür eylemler karşısında bırakınız tepki göstermeyi, derin bir sessizliğe bürünüyor. DAEŞ'la mücadelede sergilenen küresel dayanışmanın terör parantezine alınarak Müslüman düşmanı akımlara karşı da gösterilmesi şarttır. Diğer türlü insanlık medeniyetler çatışması denilen senaryolarından kendini kurtaramayacaktır. Kıymetli dostlarım, salgın sonrasında dünyamızın ekonomik, sosyal ve siyasi bakımdan büyük değişimlere sahne olacağını şimdiden görebiliyoruz. Türkiye olarak hazırlıklarımızı içinde bulunduğumuz asra ve geleceğe damgasını vuracak uzun vadeli bir vizyonla yürütüyoruz. Salgın her ne kadar ülkelerimiz ve ekonomilerimiz için riskler oluştursa da aynı zamanda pek çok fırsat penceresi de açıyor. Salgın döneminde sadece sağlıkta değil, üretim, lojistik, kamu güvenliği, istihdam, sosyal destekler alanında da ülkemiz pozitif yönde ayrıştı. Asya merkezli üretim ağına alternatif arayışlarında 3 kıtayı birleştiren stratejik konumuyla Türkiye daha fazla ön plana çıkmaya başladı. Olumsuz ekonomik iklime, tedarik ve lojistik zincirlerindeki aksaklıklara ve artan korumacılığa rağmen 2020 yılını büyümeyle kapattık. %1,8'lik oranla G20 içerisinde en yüksek büyümeyi kaydeden ikinci ülke olduk. Yine bu dönemde G20'de sanayi üretimi en çok artan devletler arasında yer aldık. 2021 yılının ilk çeyreğinde yakaladığımız %7'lik büyüme oranı yılın geri kalanı için beklentilerimizi artırdı. OECD tarafından yayınlanan son raporlarda Türk ekonomisi için 2021 yılında %5,7 ve 2022 yılında %3,4 büyüme öngörülüyor. Bu OECD üyeleri arasında öngörülen en güçlü toparlanmalardan biridir. İnşallah bu tahminlerin de ötesine geçeceğimize inanıyorum. Bu yıl toplam ihracatta 200 milyar dolara ulaşarak yeni bir rekora imza atmayı bekliyoruz. Tüm bu gelişmelere paralel olarak son 19 yıldır aralıksız sürdürdüğümüz reform gündemimizden de kopmuyoruz. Kısa süre önce insan hakları eylem planımız ile ekonomi reform paketimizi milletimizle paylaştık. Ülkemizi sivil, daha demokratik ve özgürlükçü bir anayasaya kavuşturma hedefiyle başlatmış olduğumuz çalışmalarımızı da sürdürüyoruz. Yine bu süreçte bölgemizdeki sorunları çözmek, küresel istikrar ve barışa katkıda bulunmak için yoğun bir diplomasi trafiği yürütüyoruz. Karşılıklı saygı ve eşit ortaklık temelinde komşularımızdan başlayarak bölge ülkeleriyle işbirliğimizi ilerletmekte kararlıyız. Türkiye'nin Suriye, Libya ve Doğu Akdeniz'de attığı adımların ne kadar isabetli ve yerinde olduğu son günlerde daha iyi anlaşılmıştır. Ülkemiz bu coğrafyaların tamamında üstlendiği sorumlulukla teröre set çekmek, demokrasiyi korumuş, diyalog ve uzlaşının önünü açmıştır. Katar'a yönelik uygulanan haksız abluka ve yaptırımların kaldırılmasına ve kardeş Körfez halklarının yeniden kucaklaşmasına imkan tanıyan Körfez İşbirliği Konseyi kararlarından duyduğumuz memnuniyeti de burada tekraren ifade ediyorum. Bu düşüncelerle sözlerime son verirken forumun hayırlara vesile olmasını diliyor. Başta aziz kardeşim Şeyh Temim olmak üzere düzenlenmesinde emeği geçen herkese teşekkür ediyorum. Sizleri bir kez daha saygıyla selamlıyor. Allah'a emanet ediyorum. Kalın sağlıcakla.
I'm delighted to address the Qatar Economic Forum, and I'm grateful to His Highness the Emir for providing this opportunity to offer a vision of the world we must all create together after the pandemic. If anything good can possibly come from tragedy, we have at least been given a chance to build back better and build back greener. This is the moment to break with the past and revive the global economy in a way that protects the planet and fulfills our obligations to future generations by investing in new infrastructure and encouraging innovation. we can create jobs and level up so that no one is left behind. And there's no contradiction between achieving this ambition and protecting our planet. In the last 30 years, we in the United Kingdom have cut our carbon emissions by 44%, and in the same period we've expanded our economy by 78%. Only a decade ago, about 40% of our electricity came from coal. Today the figure's below 2%, and we aim to eliminate coal altogether by 2024. There is no reason why humanity should not prosper and safeguard our planet at the same time. We have the ingenuity and the technology to achieve both. All that remains to do is to summon the will, and Qatar's role in building back greener will of course be crucial. If we are to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, then our scientists say that by the middle of this century, the carbon we produce and the amount that nature mercifully removes from the atmosphere should be in balance. And it is precisely because that vital goal can only be achieved by the common effort of every nation that Britain will bring the world together for COP26 in Glasgow in November. I hope you will all be there, and I look forward to working with you side by side to do our duty for succeeding generations and to pass on a greener and more prosperous world. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Leanne de Bassompierre, and I'm with the Prime Minister of Ivory Coast, His Excellency Patrick Ashi. Prime Minister, first off, you had a recent health scare. How are you doing now?
I'm doing fine. As you know, the last couple of years was quite hard, and we had to be very concentrated, and there was a lot of work, and I needed to have a little bit of rest. I was like burnout, so now I feel much better now.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Of course, Ivory Coast is the world's #1 cocoa producer, and it relies very heavily on the European Union for the sale of its beans. And now with proposed sustainability laws that threatens some of the country's exports, what is Ivory Coast doing to prepare for them?
Thank you very much. You're right. Côte d'Ivoire is the first world producer of cocoa, producing 40% of the world production, which represent around 2 million tons. That represents also here 40% of our domestic growth, and also 40% of our export, of total export, 47%. And that feeds between 5 and 6 million people. So you can represent how important it is for us. We heard about the legislation that was going to be set up in the European Union about a year ago. And since then, we set up a team that is going to work with what the group they have here called the European team, Euro team. And we've been working together and preparing for that legislation to come up. I think the 3 key issues they pointed out was deforestation, was also about the cocoa price to the producer, having a decent price. And the third one was the child labor. We've been setting up and working on a lot of legislation, and now we're doing our best on the implementation side. But I think that we're going to be ready for the implementation of that legislation, which will be not only in cocoa, but I think that in many other areas. I think the US is thinking about the same thing, and on our 2030 vision, which will start with the 2021 and 2025 plan, we're going over every single raw material that we're working in to be sure that it will be produced on the paying attention and respecting sustainability, which is now, as far as the world consumer are concerned, really a serious matter of subject of concern, I should say. So yes, We've been preparing. Yes, we know something is going on. Yes, we think we're going to be ready.
When we talk about farmer pay, Ivory Coast and neighboring Ghana introduced the so-called living income differential at the start of the last season in October. Some have said that it has failed or is failing. What is your opinion on this, and what is your assessment of it?
I think it's been a great achievement. To be sitting, all of us, the producer, the countries, the governments, the industrials, and talking about the fact that the price paid to the producer, the farm gate, was not a decent price, that we needed to do something to increase it, was something very good. Now we set up an amount, and then we started the implementation. As you know, on this kind of project, the starting is not always easy, the implementation phase. So that was the first campaign that we started, and we think that so far it's been so-so, but we think that by next campaign, things should go much smoother, much further down, and I think that there is the political will by, in the side of the government as well as the industrial, as well as Europe and everybody. So we don't think why it shouldn't be, move forward okay. So I'm so far happy with it, and I think it's going to work.
Okay, Ivory Coast has recently launched an anti-terrorism center at a time where jihadist attacks are moving south. What are your thoughts on France's plans to end its Barkhane military presence and its potential impacts on regional security?
I think that we should, first of all, thanks France. A couple of years ago, as you know, terrorists were moving down to Bamako, and they moved all the way to Mali to stop the terrorism advancing, and that was a very good thing on the demand of all ECOWAS. President Alassane Ouattara was at that time heading, ECOWAS. And since then, the region has been having, through ECOWAS and West African Monetary Union, a lot of thinking about, how they can help themselves prepare to be able to defend themselves. Now it requires a lot of equipment, a lot of well-trained people, and money, and that's not an easy task. And all friends beyond France, a lot of countries have been helping. And as you know, a couple of days ago, with the help of France, we've launched and inaugurated an academy where soldiers from all over the countries will come and be trained on counter-terrorism, on how to fight against terrorists, which is a good way. And we think that at one point, one way or the other, down the line, a country has to prepare himself to resist to such a terrorism attack. Now, as I say, it requires a lot of resources, and we cannot afford to buy all needed equipment to train all people. We still need help. We cannot comment on French decision, but what we're saying is that the West African Union and the ECOWAS is also preparing ways to be able to defend itself against terrorists. As I say, we have this training center. We're putting more and more money on equipment, on training of people. And we think that down the line, I don't think France is saying that from one day to the other they're going. I think there will be a roadmap that will be discussed with all main concerned countries, and step by step, as we move forward, getting much better prepared to fight against terrorists ourselves. Maybe they will retreat slowly and smoothly. That's what I think. I don't think they want to leave the region just like that as we are right now. But I think that it's a common concern for all of us, not only Africa, but Europe and all the world, the issue of terrorism. So we're working together on that. And I think that, it's something that will move forward. Great. I don't think there will be any major damage on the process.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much to you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening. I thank His Highness the Amir of the State of Qatar for inviting me to speak at the Qatar Economic Forum organized under the very timely theme, remaining the world. There exists a strong brotherly relation between Bangladesh and Qatar, spanning over a wide range of areas including economic and technical cooperation, trade and investment, defense, education, tourism, culture and sports, and human resource development. Excellencies, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed our world to multiple setbacks and fragilities. It has already claimed millions of lives and bettered the economies. We need strong global cooperation to overcome this difficult time. We firmly believe that the COVID-19 vaccines should be declared as global public goods, and the developing countries and LDCs that have capacity be given the necessary support to produce the vaccines. As we are witnessing the challenges, we need to take immediate, collective and concerted actions together to help mitigate the impact of the pandemic through expanding trade, business and investment for our common prosperity. The Qatar Economic Forum has provided us the platform to identify opportunities and share ideas and solutions to achieve that goal and prepare ourselves for countering the future crises efficiently. Excellencies, Bangladesh has achieved sustained growth of more than 6% over the past decade. We received the final recommendation to graduate from the LDCs. While fighting the current pandemic, we have been trying to strike a balance between lives and livelihoods. Our government has so far announced various stimulus packages amounting to $15.1 billion US. Despite the pandemic, our GDP growth reached 6.1% in 2020 to 2021, one of the highest in the world. The Digital Bangladesh Vision, launched by my government 10 years back, has helped the country to adapt quickly with the new business and work environment triggered by COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh has excellent investment environment and is offering a wide range of incentives. The public and private investors of Qatar and other countries of the Middle East may seize the opportunities in Bangladesh, particularly in the fields of infrastructure, ICT, renewable energy, light engineering and pharmaceutical industries, and jute and agro products. Excellency, over the past few years, we have been observing the rise of populism, anti-globalization sentiments, and economic protectionism around the world. We have to stand together to strengthen multilateralism as a precondition to expanding economic activities. We need to ensure peace and stability everywhere in the world. The COVID-19 is a litmus test for the global solidarity. The 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda can be our blueprint to overcome this crisis. I would like to put forward few suggestions to consider in framing post-COVID-19 economic recovery plan. Number one, we need to take ambitious climate action to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement. Number 2, we must leverage science, technology, and innovation for closing the digital divide. 3, we need targeted international support to revitalize global trade and export earnings. 4, the host countries, business leaders, and investors in the region should contribute to the reintegration plan of migrant workers highlighted as vulnerable group. 5, there must be new international support measures for the graduating LDCs to prevent any possible slide back due to the pandemic. And finally, we need an inclusive, sustainable, and holistic recovery plan for shared prosperity. In order to ensure sustainable and equitable order after the pandemic, we need whole of the world approach now. Thank you all again.
We took flying for granted, but the pandemic grounded airlines, locked us in our homes, and brought air travel and trade to a halt. Will we ever get back to the way it used to be? On a search and destroy mission for a microscopic virus with ultraviolet light. New technologies for air travel in the new normal of a pandemic. From antiviral robots to the increasingly common thermal screening monitors, airlines like Qatar Airways are going the extra mile to keep travelers safe. But between lockdowns, closed borders, and travel restrictions, passengers are few. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic wiped out an estimated $125 billion of revenue in the airline industry. Many fleets were grounded for good as airlines closed shop. Hamid International Airport in Doha was no different, with Qatar Airways hit hard. Planes on average are 40% full.
We had the same negative impact and a drastic fall in passengers than any other airline in the world.
Right.
But the difference at Qatar Airways, we continuously flow through the pandemic.
The company slashed 20% of its workforce in 2020, and more cuts are expected. The fleet of Airbus A380s are proving to be an overhang on recovery. Not only are their CO2 emissions high, but their passenger capacity is unlikely to be matched by demand. You've grounded your A380s.
At this stage, yes, and we do not plan to fly a lot after the pandemic. Why? Because you have today, if you fly a 380, 80% more CO2 emission versus an Airbus 350, and it's just not responsible towards the planet to do that.
Qatar Airways has expanded routes, but air travel may take a while to recover despite glimmers of hope.
The US market is now rebounding more. The African market is showing some signs also.
Qatar Airways is a strong advocate for vaccine passports as a necessary move to save the industry. So do you think that vaccine passports are going to become something that is going to be implemented, a thing of the future?
I think yes, it has to be to simplify the life of the customer and to go back to a more seamless process.
Qatar Airways is working with the International Air Transport Association on a digital health pass with standardized rules. But vaccine passports open the door to potential discrimination. Less vaccinated regions, such as Africa, may not be given equal status as those from rich countries. And besides, corporate travel has a competitor. Do you think that there's a sense that corporate travel doesn't need to be as extensive, for example, as it was before, because, there's Zoom?
No, yes. The more I work with Zoom, and I worked a lot with Zoom, to be very honest, in the last months, the more I feel and I think that I need to see my business partners.
Yeah, but you have to say that.
If you
Welcome to this session focused on very much getting us all moving again, or as the title says, back in the air. My name's Guy Johnson. I'm one of the Bloomberg anchors. Thank you for joining us today. The fact that we're all doing this virtually tells us that there is probably significant work still to be done. Progress thus far, limited, and I would argue regional. We need to turn a narrow body recovery into a wide body recovery. Short haul to long haul, I guess you could probably put it. While we may get back in the air as well, it's unlikely that we're going back to what we had before. Business models have already been altered significantly and will continue to be altered. Business travel and freight, obviously two areas where we may see significant change. Does first class survive the pandemic? And then there's the issue of sustainability, with the pandemic providing an opportunity, hopefully, to accelerate the green revolution. Joining us now, we've only got 30 minutes. It's a fantastic panel. We have His Excellency Akbar Al-Baker, the Group CEO, of course, of Qatar Airways, Luis Gallego, the CEO of the IAG Group. We've got Yvonne Manzi-Makolo, the CEO of Rwanda Air, and Dave Calhoun, the President and CEO of the Boeing company. Now, I've got a couple of questions I'm going to be asking the panelists. I'm going to ask the first one first, because I think it kind of sets the scene quite nicely for us. What is your attitude towards international travel? The answers are fairly straightforward. I would get on a flight tomorrow. I'm certainly in that camp. Or I don't feel comfortable yet traveling internationally. We have, as I say, thus far seen progress being fairly limited. We are seeing regional pickups, certainly in the United States. I saw the TSA data for the United States yesterday, very, very strong. We're getting a really good, solid regional recovery. We're starting to see that pick up in Europe as well. China has had a very strong domestic recovery as well, but international travel remains fairly limited. So we'll bring up the panelists, we'll bring up the answers to that as it starts to come through. There you go. That's the answer I think we're all looking for. I would get on a flight tomorrow 70+%, 75%, 25% though, still not feeling comfortable getting on a flight. But the vast majority of people certainly looking like they are looking to get back on an aeroplane fairly soon. The impediment at the moment does feel, therefore, largely to be coming from governments, and the fact that we don't have a joined up system for making this happen. Your Excellency, let me start with you in Doha. Are you frustrated by the lack of progress?
I'm extremely frustrated because what is happening every day is that governments are changing protocols of who they will let enter and who they will put in quarantine and who they will restrict from entering their countries. Different requirements for vaccination, for the tests, the COVID tests. So this is really confusing the airline and the passengers. And I hope that the government realize that they are damaging not only their economies, but they're also damaging the aviation industry as a whole.
In terms of when you think we're going to see change, Luis, let me bring you into the conversation. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, saying that it'll be next year before we get back to travel being normal. Is that the kind of timeline you're working to? And are you frustrated as well?
Yes, I think the situation that we have right now, we cannot allow anymore. I think vaccinated people should be able to travel freely. Vaccines are effective in protecting people, and we need all the governments to be more ambitious. We need the world to come back and to protect economies and to protect jobs. So I think, for example, what we see now that is happening in EU is a good movement. I think from the 1st of July, vaccinated people or those with negative tests or recover from COVID will be able to travel. And I think here in UK, we need to follow that approach. I think the traffic light system is not working, and we need a system fit for purpose. So we need to see vaccinated people traveling. We don't want quarantines. I think they are not working anymore. And tests, in case they are needed, must be affordable and simple.
Dave, at the moment it feels very regional, though. That seems to be certainly the narrative that is developing. We've just heard Luis talking about what is happening in Europe. We can see what's happening in the United States. We can see what's happening in China. But it does feel very regional. Is this going to be, and how long will it remain so, a narrow body recovery? What needs to happen to make this a wide body recovery?
Well, it's the same issue that was just discussed with, of course, our customers. I think the domestic recoveries in these large developed countries are a testament to the effectiveness of our vaccine and the confidence that the flying public has in the vaccine, because they're coming back in a very robust way. I think the folks that are trying to organize the international protocols here have to look hard at that and follow the vaccine. So vaccinated people from all around the world should be able to travel to one another's countries. And I think that is the way it will develop, but we've got to get a little less politics involved and a little more science, because these vaccines are in fact effective.
Yvonne, you've got quite a lot of experience dealing with this. Rwanda obviously has had to deal with not only COVID-19, but also Ebola. You learned a lot from that experience. What can you tell us about that experience, how it's transferred into the COVID experience, and what you think, therefore, the measures needed to return people to air travel likely look like?
Well, we had Ebola within the region, so right next door in the DRC. So the government put in place the basic infrastructure to handle that pandemic, and that infrastructure is really what has been repurposed for this current pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So in terms of beds in hospitals, in terms of testing capabilities, training of personnel from a disinfection perspective, proper use of PPE. All that has really helped the country in terms of dealing with the current pandemic, and Rwanda has been at the forefront in terms of containing this pandemic. But the most important thing has really been the trust issue, the trust in science, the citizens trusting the government, and therefore implementing the protocols that have been put in place. That translated very well for the airline as well, because very early on, a year before COVID started, we already had thermal cameras in our airports. We were already disinfecting heavily our aircrafts because we were flying to some of these countries, and we were able to be trained very quickly by the Ministry of Health as well. And in order for us to get out of this, and the rest of the panelists have mentioned it, vaccinated people should be allowed to travel freely, and those who are not vaccinated, as long as they have negative COVID certificates, they should be allowed to travel. Otherwise, all these arbitrary rules which are being put in place and quarantining which is being put in place is really disrupting the industry, and it'll take a lot longer for us to recover.
Okay. Your Excellency, the sense I'm getting from all of you is that we need to lean on science. The vaccines are the way to reopen travel. We need to make sure that the protocols line up. Why is that not happening, Your Excellency? Why are governments not stepping up? When you talk to governments around the world, when you're talking about trying to make this happen, how much feedback are you getting? How many conversations are you having with government? Because certainly the airlines that I talk to in Europe are finding it really a huge struggle to kind of connect with governments and make the point. Are you struggling with that as well?
We, all the airlines and the CEOs are in the same boat. We are all struggling with authorities who keep on not making their mind exactly what they want. I do understand, like all of my colleagues mentioned about vaccinating people and allowing people who are vaccinated to travel freely. But the problem is, until you really get the masses vaccinated, you will keep on getting mutations, and the mutations will then keep getting waves of the third wave or fourth wave or fifth wave. And this continuously happening will let the governments, again, to tighten their belts. The example is the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Boris Johnson mentioned that he was going to open up on the 17th of June. Now it is 18th of July. And this could again extend once they see the Delta variant increasing in the United Kingdom, and so are in other countries. But the problem is that until the biggest markets in the world don't open up, Brazil, China, India, we will keep on having a depression in the long-haul travel. And for us, yes, big countries like United States and China and India can open up their domestic markets. But when you have a hub and spoke operation and you want people to travel long haul, it has to be a consistent protocol of how you will treat the vaccinated people and how you'll open up the countries and the markets.
Dave Calhoun, another way of looking at this is that this is protectionism. Is that the correct way of perceiving what is going on?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't use that word. I think it's fear and the lack of information. Look, political interests, government interests, they're looking at the flying public and they're having a trust discussion with them. And they want to ensure that they don't step over the line on that subject. And so they're a little fearful of making the right decision. So I think Akbar's comments are perfectly accurate. The penetration of vaccines around the world is going to take time. It may not be until the end of next year before we get enough penetration broadly to accept vaccines and it has a meaningful impact on intercontinental traffic. But at the same time, there are protocols that can and should be agreed on. My hope is that there'll be a number of bilateral arrangements.
We may have just lost Dave there, so we'll move on.
For others?
Oh, there you go. You're back. Sorry, Dave, you just froze for a moment. Carry on the thought.
Sorry, yeah, just at the North Atlantic, if they can develop bilateral protocols with all of the respective countries, my hope is it becomes a template and a good template for many other routes around the world. But this will take time. This is tough to sort out, and there's no multilateral mechanism to make it happen quickly.
My kind of attempt to ask that question and talk about protection is that my fear, certainly, and I'm hearing this being talked about, is that this will linger. This sort of resistance, this antipathy towards travel is something that is going to become more embedded in the way that governments think about the way that they approach different regions. And I'm slightly fearful that this could become a new normal, particularly when it comes to Asia, particularly when it comes to China. Luis, when you look at what is happening here, do you think that there is going to be a return to global travel, that globalization is going to continue to move people around the world? Or do you think that the pandemic is going to change and alter government's approach, that they are going to make it harder to travel, that it is going to be part of a wider narrative in terms of the way that we reshore, become more domestically focused, more regionally focused? Luis, do you worry that could become part and parcel of the narrative here?
Yes, I'm worried about that, but I think what we need is that everybody takes the decision based in scientific data, not based in political reasons. So from my point of view, it's very difficult to explain why Europe now is open to the US traffic and UK is not open with the same data. So it's clear that we are not following scientific data. So I think that's what we need to follow. It's going to be impossible to have zero risk. We need to manage risk. We know a lot of that in aviation. And what we have to do is to open the corridors that it makes sense. So, for example, you know that we are pushing very hard to open the UK-US corridor. It doesn't make any sense with the successful rollout of vaccination in both countries that we are still waiting for that. And we are losing a lot of money every day. So I think we have a lot of pent-up demand. When we put flights, we see that everybody wants to fly. Even business traffic is coming back, slowly, but it's coming back. So I think what we have is scientific data approach.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is this feels increasingly political and less scientific. And that, I think, is a cause of concern long-term for the industry. Let's talk about the business mix and how it is going to change. We've got a great panel question that we can put out there to the audience. What is the future of business travel? More selective trips than before, back to pre-pandemic levels to make up for lost in-person time, or a total drop-off with video technology cementing a virtual approach? While we wait for the results of that coming through from the audience, Your Excellency, let me ask you that question. How does business travel come back? Will business travel come back? Does first class also survive the pandemic?
First and foremost, let me tell you that at Qatar Airways, we have done away with first class. And we have a product in business class that is really equivalent to most of the first class of all the airlines in the world. So what we are looking is, first and foremost, business travel will certainly come back because businessmen, they like to face people, they like to feel people, they like to have to notice the body language. People, they don't like just to sit in front of a screen and conduct business. But on the other hand, I have to look at the business class, how we are going to fill. And to that, I can tell you that business class product will fill very quickly because there are people that are longing to travel. They're waiting just for countries to open. And where the countries are open, we see that, as a matter of fact, we have 10 percentage points higher business class occupancy than we had pre-COVID period. So you can see that there is a demand, and I think it will fill. But most importantly, what we have to see is herd immunity, vaccination available to everybody, so that the virus gets weaker, and people then get comfortable to travel. You saw the statistics that you put up, 70% of the people want to travel, but 70% of the people are not going to fill our long-haul flights. So we need to see a way out of it, but I'm confident that business travel and business class occupancy will rise very rapidly once the pandemic is under control.
Luis, what is your expectation?
I fully agree with Akbar that what we see is the high level of pent-up demand. I think business travel will take longer, that is going to come back. We are talking to our customers, we are talking to the different companies, and what we see is that 75% is very similar to the result that you presented before. Have already said that they will fly before the end of the year. Maybe the shape of business travel may change, but as Akbar said, face-to-face meetings are going to be crucial.
But how do you manage the model? I want to just see if we can get that graphic back up again just a moment ago, because what it talked about was more selective trips. There you go, more selective trips than before. So even if we are going to see business travel coming back, but it looks like there will be a reduction. You don't take every business trip, you don't take every meeting face-to-face. How do you change the business model, Luis, if that is going to be the case? Because that is a big profit driver, particularly for IAG.
Yes, in the case of IAG, corporate revenue is around 30% of our total revenue. So I think after this crisis, we need to be more flexible. That is going to be very important. And we need to be leaner. And that's what we are doing. With the retirement of the 747 and 340-600 in Iberia, we have reduced the number of premium seats. And now we have the flexibility to adapt ourselves to the future. So I think that that's going to be very important, to be flexible and before we see what's going to happen.
Dave, does this change the way you build aeroplanes in terms of the economics? Do you think you're going to be building as many aeroplanes? Do you think airlines are smaller if business travel is less? One of the things as well that I'd like to ask you about is freight has been the savior in terms of cash flow for many airlines. Do you think freight continues, and do you think you'll be building more freighters?
Yeah, so a couple questions there. Yes, there's been, in my view, a secular lift on freight that will not go away and will continue in light of the world's move toward e-commerce in every way. So I'm optimistic about freight. Tourism, I expect to be as robust as each of our airline leaders have suggested. And finally, on business, I agree with the word selective, but in a very different way. Every business leader would prefer that the business travel that it utilizes is meant to visit customers, external partners, and new constituencies and markets that we've not seen before, and eliminate internal travel. But that is a net gain for travel, and I'm not worried about that. We live on competition. Competition is what drives travel, and I am certain that the business market will also have a robust recovery.
Akbar, let's just talk about what Dave said about freight. He expects freight to remain fairly robust. You are one of the big freight companies in terms of the airline business. Do you need more freighters? Do I need to see a 777XF from Dave Calhoun? Do I need to see a 350 a 350F from Fabrice down in Toulouse? What are you looking for? Let's try and get an idea of how strong you think this market is going to be.
As a matter of fact, we have been the largest freight carrier minus FedEx and UPS in the world for the last 2 years, and more so over the pandemic period. We are really hungry for more freighters. Unfortunately, Dave cannot produce for us more 777F. The earliest he can give me is in 2023. And we are very keen to be a launch customer, be it for the 350F or the 777X freighters. We will concentrate in Qatar Airways on air freight as an important part of our total strategy. Of course, but first, we are an airline to carry passengers.
Okay. Well, hopefully we've got some demand there for the airplane. I don't know why I said Fabrice. I think it's Guillaume. I think I'm getting my history mixed up. Let's talk a little bit about where you see the freight market going and the business market going. Luis, do you see freight adding does it compensate? Does it change the mix in terms of what you think the business model looks like? I don't think we can hear Fabrice, unfortunately. Let's go to Yvonne. Yvonne, what does the business model look like differently to you coming out of this crisis? How differently are you going to be doing business, if at all?
Well, as everybody else has mentioned, business will recover. Business travel will recover, but a little bit slower. That's what we're seeing on the African continent. We are seeing a rise in leisure travel as well, as more and more people are getting vaccinated in the US, UK, and Europe. So we are seeing a rise in tourists and the diaspora who've been stuck outside for a very long time, who haven't visited their families. We're seeing a rise in that as well. Cargo will remain strong. We survived the worst of the pandemic by operating cargo-only flights, and we continue to operate a lot of cargo volumes right now. The yields are very high for cargo as well. So right now we're seeing cargo as a percentage of total revenue increasing from what it was pre-pandemic at about 6% to close to 15%. So there is a change there. But we're very optimistic that especially with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, that we will see a huge rise in business travel, as well as an increase in cargo movement within the continent.
Okay, let's move on to the final area. We've got about 7 minutes left. I want to talk a bit about how the industry emerges from the pandemic in a more sustainable way. Luis, I hope we can hear you now, because this is certainly an area I know that you've been incredibly focused on. We saw this morning the Sustainable Aviation Alliance in the UK putting out some more targets, 10 and 20-year targets in terms of how the industry is going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. A lot of this relies, though, on offsets. And I'm wondering whether or not the industry is really committed in the way that it should be to trying to accelerate this process. Are offsets good enough?
Oh, I think we have different measures for the short term and also for the long term. In the short term, I think we are investing a lot of money in new aircraft, new technology, the latest technology that we have in the industry now. I think sustainable aviation fuel is going to be critical in the short term. And I think we need to think also in the future with the new technology. I think hydrogen aircraft is something that we can have, but it's going to take time. So it's important the commitment from everybody in the chain. It's not only a question of the airlines. Aviation is true that we are responsible for 2.4% of global emissions, but it's not only a question of airlines. We need the support from the different governments. If we want to put sustainable aviation fuel in our aircraft, we are going to need more plants. We are going to need sustainable aviation fuel at an affordable price. So we need the commitment of everybody in the chain.
Dave, do you think it is possible that the aviation industry can make this move post-crisis, A, with the balance sheets that we have at the moment, and B, we saw the trade deal between the EU and the US the other day, Airbus, Boeing. But government, every airline I talk to talks to me about the fact that government must play a major role in helping the airline industry, helping the aerospace industry make this transition. We've just kind of talked about the fact we're not going to see kind of launch aid and support for the industry, but is that actually, ironically, now actually the biggest thing that we need to see happen within this industry? Government needs to step up and we need to provide support for the way that the industry is going to develop.
Well, I agree with that premise. We're going to need help, but it needs to be informed help. We have a lot of tools to work with between now and 2050, which is sort of the target date for most folks on the subject of sustainability. We have a huge fleet renewal opportunity. Every new airplane, when it displaces an old one, is an incredible jump in emissions efficiency. ATC upgrades will improve that. And then most importantly, as Luis said, sustainable aviation fuel. There are 4 formulas that exist. There are engines that can use it. Boeing is committed that every next airplane that comes out post 2030, and we're already close to that as we speak, will be SAF ready. And then, yes, a combination of airplane manufacturers and propulsion manufacturers agreeing on the best course, and then policymakers stipulating that SAF will begin to penetrate the industry. When that happens, we will get scale, the industry will step up, and we will get to the kind of cost parity that I think Luis, Akbar, and Yvonne are looking for. I don't believe that is a tough path.
Do you need to see governments, though, coordinating this? We've got Europe, we've got the United States, and we've got China. Everybody's going to be on different pages.
That's possible. That's possible. And like our discussion on COVID and protocols internationally, they'll have to come together. I suspect this will be an easier one to come together on than others. And I do think, as you would expect, certain countries, largely Europe, the US, will take lead roles in developing policy around this.
Your Excellency, I'm going to give you the final word on this. Where does Qatar sit on this? Qatar, obviously a huge energy producer, hydrocarbons. What is the mandate you're getting from government in terms of making your airline net neutral?
Well, we are under a lot of pressure from our government to reduce our emissions and to make our aeroplanes very fuel efficient. But at the end of the day, it all depends on the OEMs, on the engine manufacturers, on the aircraft manufacturers, but most importantly, also on the oil companies, because oil companies have invested so much in hydrocarbons, in oil fields, in developments of those oil fields, that now they don't want to spend enough money for the future of our planet. They don't want to invest enough money to produce sustainable fuel at affordable prices. We can invest, like Qatar Airways is investing in state-of-the-art airplanes with 18, 19, 20% fuel efficiency, but we cannot afford or be able to buy volumes of sustainable fuel, which we want to, in order to save our planet and reduce our emissions. So it again boils down to the producers, the oil companies, to invest and make those sustainable fuel available at affordable prices so that we can deliver on the promises we are making to be carbon neutral growth by 2050. I know it is a wishful thinking. 2050 will come very fast, but we need to invest today.
Okay, I've actually got 1 minute left, so I'm going to put the final question to Dave Calhoun. Dave, you've probably got an opening in your lineup to produce another aeroplane to compete potentially with the A320 XLR. How different will that aeroplane be on a from a sustainability point of view when we finally get you making that decision?
Well, again, I don't want to predict the time frame around making a decision like that. And when we field a new airplane, I want to make sure that it serves a larger opportunity than just competing against the XLR-F. I'm bullish on this in every way. And one comment I'd like to make is, if an airplane comes along in the next 5 or 10 years, its claim to sustainability will have to be built around sustainable aviation fuel. It will not be built around electric or hydrogen or anything of that sort.
We're going to leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time today. A fantastic panel. I certainly learned a lot today. Thank you very much indeed.
It was the mantra of the past 20 years, but how did globalization fall from its giddy heights to becoming a word that has fueled a populist backlash all over the world? With nations turning inward, the once heralded borderless world is increasingly becoming stratified by national boundaries. Can globalization make a comeback? Let's find out in our next sessions. We start with Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
I want to congratulate the Emir and the government of Qatar for its success in navigating the most serious peacetime crisis, a medical and economic crisis which has hit oil and gas, international trade and global supply chains. But throughout, Qatar has remained a beacon to the world as an outward-looking, globally engaged nation, with the Emir, to his great credit, stepping up his program of aid to countries in need, not least in global education. Now, in 1962, in a famous speech, President John Kennedy told America it should complement its declaration of independence with a global declaration of interdependence. And never have there been so many global problems, from pandemics to climate change, from financial instability to the refugee crisis and threats to peace, medical, economic, environmental, and social problems that are global, which need global solutions. And the demand is that the nations of the world work together. And so, in response to the stated desire of the US president for a new era of multilateralism, I want to suggest how we can ensure through the four major global forums of 2021, the G20, COP26 on climate change, the review of the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, and the UN General Assembly, we build back better. I believe that after years of America first, China first, Russia first, India first, and so on, we are at a turning point, and we must ensure that history turns in this right direction. And I believe that as a world, we can make decisions that, first of all, could eventually halt COVID in its tracks. We know no one is safe till anyone is safe. And while the cost of vaccinating the entire world is in billions, the gains from enhanced trade and economic activity is in trillions. The G7 offered 1 billion vaccines to the poorest countries. The world needs 11 billion vaccines. And I hope we can agree over the next few months a burden-sharing plan proposed by leaders in Norway and South Africa, under which between them, the richest countries pay the cost of vaccines for all. And if we can meet this medical challenge, then we can obviously then meet and master the economic challenge. I chaired the G20 in 2009 during the global financial crisis, and I know the world is currently at risk of a two-speed world economy. America and China growing fast, the Middle East, Central Asia, Africa, Europe at half what the Americans and Chinese are doing. And to avoid that, we need global fiscal and monetary coordination to ensure balanced growth, debt restructuring to enable low-income countries to recover, a renewed emphasis on our sustainable development goals to ease poverty, and synchronized investment in our infrastructures that, as the IMF has shown, would, if synchronized, add 2 trillion to world economic output. Now, such an agreement is possible in the G20 in November, and it could be the starting point for a successful COP26 climate change summit in Glasgow. Prosperity to be sustained has to be shared, and we must now raise COP26 level of ambition by proposing that each of us embrace tougher near-term carbon reduction targets and by making good the promises made to low-income countries that we'd assist their transition to green economies. Now, let me also thank Qatar for your role as a peacemaker in the region and beyond, not least in Afghanistan. And let me say that with the review of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in August, we have the chance to halt an escalating nuclear arms race. When running for office, President Biden offers support for a ban on nuclear testing, an end to the enrichment of uranium and plutonium, and he has suggested in the past that all nuclear weapon states reduce tensions by declaring they will not ever use nuclear weapons first. And this is an offer that will reduce the role of nuclear weapons in defense strategies and make ourselves a more peaceful world. Now, not all will be achieved in 1 year, But I say to you that the message that can go out from a forum as prestigious as this is that a new era of cooperation is on the way. We can make our world a healthier, safer, greener, and fairer place. And this is a message that can be heard in every continent and reverberate everywhere to the benefit of us all. Thank you.
We are here with His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jabr Al Thani. He's a former Prime Minister of the State of Qatar. Sheikh Hamad, thank you so much for joining us. In addition to your government title, you're also a very prolific investor. So I want to start there. Give, in a quick sentence or a couple words, give me your sense of where the world stands from an economic view and from an investment view as well.
Well, as you know, people say the economy change after COVID. I don't want to call it change. I think the economy after COVID accelerate the change to the new economy. And for that, there is a new kind of economy which we need to understand and listen. And right now, we cannot take the market as it is and say, well, we are in a good market or bad, because we know that the market is a flood by cash from many central banks. So I don't think there is a measure now to say that the economy is good. Of course, it's good and excellent, but all of us know it's because of the steroids being given to the economy. The main things is to see the economy from 2022 and see how it will work from there. But no doubt there is a change in economy, and there is a change of kind of what I call it the new economy, .com economy or whatever. And always we know that these economies, they merge fast, but also there will be a fast correction.
Where are you putting your marginal dollar right now?
Well, right now is you need to play safe, and I think play safe. The market is good. I think the market could stay good for another year or 1.5 years, but I don't see, where it goes from here. 5%, 10% is difficult. If you go even to the treasury bill, it does not give you anything. So you have to be in the market part of it. But also the market, you need also not to put your basket in the .com, what we call it, companies, or the new, internets companies, or kind of this. You need to divide it between a few sectors. And energy sectors is, renewable sector is an important sector. It's merging and it will merge. But also you need to see also the financial, because the financial being hammers a lot, and I think there is a room to grow for the financial. If we are talking about the energy companies, I think the energy companies already have rallied a lot, and I don't know from here how much they will rally.
I want to get through all of those things, but one that you mentioned was staying away from the hot tech companies. So I take it you're not investing in any SPACs?
No, SPACs is already overdone, in my opinion. And I think when things overdone, and when you see that everybody in the SPAC, you need to be careful. I think it's been successful, but I don't know how long it could be successful from here. For that reason, you need to be careful from now on, and you need to be tactical, and you need to be also quick in taking decision to go in and out.
You mentioned financials. You are a key investor in a lot of European banks. Do you think consolidation is inevitable in European banking? Do you see more of that in the pipeline?
I think it should happen, because if we compare the European bank with the American banks or with the Chinese banks, we'll find that they are too small to survive by themselves. And I think merging is important between them. Is it now? Everybody waiting to have a better valuation to think about merging. But I believe to merge now is better because the market is being taken by the big bank, the giant bank in Europe. And if they don't do something quickly in Europe, in European financial, I think they will have difficulties to compete with the American and the Chinese. Already they have difficulties to compete with them, but they will have more difficulties to compete with them.
Do you think that Deutsche Bank, something of which you are a shareholder, do you think Deutsche Bank should merge with another lender?
Well, I am not in the board, so they have to decide, but I'm saying what I think. And I believe that mergers is inevitable.
You're also a huge real estate investor. In fact, at one point, I think you were dubbed the king of London real estate. How has the pandemic affected your real estate portfolio?
Well, there is a queen in London, so I'm not the king of that, but I own some properties in London. So let us put it this way. The real estate have difficulties at the moment because of the pandemic, especially in the hospitality side, office side, retail side. And the recovery will not be easy, and because the habit of the people being changed. Offices, we need to know if they are going to have the full space as it is, or they need more space per person. That will change the economic, and that will make the office building go back to where it was or better if the space per person change. That's a very important thing. And also, is all the people going back to their office, or some of them, they will be running as they run now from their home? That's another challenge. The retail challenge, especially in the consumer side and the retail side even, challenges because of the new .com things and a new habit of the people, how they order their things, especially in the young generation. I think that one will change the economic of the retail, also because it goes ahead of itself last few years. So there is a correction, and I think it needs time. Hospitality, the hotels, I think it will go back very quickly because people is eager to go back to travel, since they are almost now 2 years with no travel. So that could come if the pandemic, control. I think that could come very quickly. But property traditionally always do good. Every 7-10 years, you can see that the price is almost double of the properties everywhere, especially if it is in the right city, in the right place. So yes, there is challenges now, but there is also outlook, a good outlook. It depends, of course, about the habit, which I mentioned of the consumer.
Do you have a date for recovery back to pre-pandemic levels, do you think, in real estate in big cities in particular?
First, we need to know the habit of the people. Still, we know the offices is not full. Not all the banks people go back to their work. We know that right now they are working with 30-40% capacity of people. If the people go back to their offices and start work, do they need more space per person? That that mean the office buildings will hold in. If they don't need a space because of the pandemic and the new situation, that mean they will have 4 or 5 years difficulties of the office and retail. Retail, I think, have more challenges because of the new, as I told you, the .com, because everybody now, consumer, you can go to any shop and order your things through your internet, and you'll get it in your house within hours. So there is, especially with the new generation, not my generation, I like to go and shop by myself. But people now, they would like things to come.
But my generation, for sure. As a millennial, I can attest. I want to bring things closer to home, talk a little bit about regional politics. There have been some signs that Saudi officials and Iranian officials are trying to resolve their differences. Do you see the Gulf on a better path in terms of its relationship with Iran?
Right now, no, but this is a hope that we have to see a reconciliation or really direct talk between the Iranian and the GCC. And also the GCC have to come together with one policy. I think there was some difficulties last few years. We know why. And these difficulties now, we have to think after that how we bring the GCC to act again in the right way and to face the new challenges. There is many challenges in our region. And if we don't have consolidate GCC with one vision, with one decision, and I mean in the main topics at least, then we will have many challenges, not in the political side, and in the military side and the economy side. As you know, we have a lot of new leaders in the GCC, and there is a hope in these leaders how they can. But we have more challenges for them. Situation is more difficult for them because they have to face a lot of demands from their people and a lot of challenges around them. So you need to find a way how to bring the policy together of the GCC to face all these challenges.
You know, a lot of Gulf experts have been saying essentially the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the reason that Gulf leaders are making policy decisions anymore. They're really much more focused on Iran. Do you think that's a fair perspective? Do you think that's accurate from what you're seeing and the people you talk to?
Well, there is a principle, and one of the principles that there is an obligation for us to help the Palestinians to solve their problem with the Israelis. So I think they need our support to guide them for a peaceful solution with the Israelis. I think this is a very important topic. Exactly with the Iranian, we have another topic, which is important. It's different than the conflicts between the Israeli and the Palestinian. What we have with the Iranian, there is a lot of prosperities if we can work together economically, financially, culturally. We are in the same region and will stay in the same region for a long time. Just we need to be frank to each other and not to interfere in the other country's situation or politics. And I think there is a lot of prosperities ahead if both sides can take the lead to be frank and to lay the path and the way how we can develop this relation.
You stepped out of the prime ministership 8 years ago. Looking ahead to the next 8 years, do you see the Middle East in a better place than it is right now?
Well, realistic, still there is a lot of challenges ahead in the coming 7 years or 10 years, because a lot of issues which happened the last 7 or 8 years, it's not being resolved. It's been deferred, or it's been kept in a way which it does not develop to other things. I think people would like in the Middle East to see a democracy, and the leadership in the region of the Middle East have to give democracy to the people in a very realistic path and very realistic timetable, but the timetable to be respected by the governments, not one step ahead and 2 steps back, because that's what lead people to go for revolutions and to try to disturb the economic situation, although it's already been disturbed for many reasons. Part of the reason, the responsibility of the leadership of the region. So in my opinion, the challenges is there, maybe more challenges there, and this is why the leaders need to act in a different way and accelerate their performance in their countries.
Sheikh Hamad, thank you so much for joining the Qatar Economic Forum. Pleasure to speak with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
joined here by His Excellency Ahmed Al-Sayed. He is the chairman of the Qatar Free Zones Authority and a Minister of State here in Qatar. And also Farouk Goler, the CEO of EBSASH, the Aegean Free Zone Development and Operating Company. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Farouk, I want to start with you since you're coming to us all the way from Turkey. Tell me more about the two top goals of the Aegean Free Zone Authority. What are the things that you want to accomplish in a macro sense?
When we look at Turkey, Turkey started to developed the free zone in 1980s. As you know, globalization started and Turkey affected very much by the globalization in early 80s. And I might say that one of the most important decisions given by the Turkish authorities is to establish the free zone to attract the foreign direct investment to Turkey. So the first two free zones in Turkey established late 1980s. The aim was to generate current account deficit, help to current account deficit in 1980s, and create job and be part of the globalization, contributing through the trade.
I want to compare a little bit the purpose of the Qatar Free Zone Authority because it's a little bit different. It's not as much about jobs for locals necessarily.
Yes. Let me just elaborate here. As you know, Qatar, it's a small economy compared to Turkey, small population. But, the government, decided to create, or to attract FDI. And the free zone was, one of the latest initiatives to attract and to do a business development, mainly to attract FDI and also to enable a partnership, between foreign investor and local investors. So it's an economic development platform, being established to attract international and to mix it with local. And when we said international, we means, really a different, investment from the West, from the East. And, we are trying to create an ecosystem that we reconnect the world in our zone. So mainly we are trying to achieve an economic diversification by attracting FDI and also encourage private sector to partner with them.
Now, diversification is an issue for Gulf countries generally who are dependent on hydrocarbons. How is it going, do you think? What's your assessment of where we are in that process?
In Qatar, I think we are doing, very well. There is good activities. As you know, Qatar went through a different development phase. So, I will not talk about the other, but I will talk about our country. Actually, since before the 1995, most of our focus was on the oil. After 96, which is the first shipment of gas, and the government revenue being enhanced by the gas revenue, the country or the government, start to diversify our platform and create a main institution here in Qatar. So before 2000, for example, Qatar Airways and then Qatar Foundations and others. In the 2000 era, at the beginning, at the first, 5 years, the Supreme Council for Investment, Economic Affairs and Investment has been created. Other main institutions to attract FDI, QFC, Qatar Science and Technology Park, Qatar Investment Authority, for investment, and then we came with the national, vision and the free zone later.
So 2021, you're along the process, but not necessarily there yet, exactly.
We are progressing in a steady pace and very well things, and we have achieved a lot so far.
Farouk, I want to talk to you about how you measure things like employment in particular. Is that are you measuring the number of people employed by the free zone as a sense of your achievement and your progress, or what do you look at essentially in terms of indicators?
Actually, the target changed through the years in Turkey. Nowadays, the most important thing for the free zones are to create a high added value products, high technology products. It is actually changed. The concentration is changed to improve the technology of the companies in free zones. For instance, and also still we are behind the export. For instance, the latest change in free zone regulations in Turkey is to establish specialized free zones. Now we are having a specialized free zones for certain technologies or for certain products.
I want to talk about today specifically because COVID-19 has encouraged some degree of fragmentation across the world economically, countries wanting to bring their industries, their top industries home. Your Excellency, what have you been hearing about from companies that would consider doing business in a free zone? Yeah. How has that conversation changed in the last 18 months?
Okay. So the good news here, we started late, which is, to be frank with you, can put it as a positive because we established it and we are focusing on tomorrow world. So, of course, the technology was one of our main themes. So we have started before COVID, focusing on disruptive technology, focusing on bringing the big data to enable the business environment to prepare companies for tomorrow. So, COVID really impacted the world, but we continue our smooth operation during this, period, thanks to technology and thanks to our strategic partner. We have Microsoft, we have Google, and, we have the big data. So all of our focus, to be frank with you, for the first phase investors like Thales, like Google, like Microsoft, like also the logistic companies, was using technology and prepare themselves for tomorrow, which is, to be frank with you, helped us to deal with COVID situation in very well way.
Farouk, I understand that your free zone does a little bit more manufacturing. How has COVID changed the situation for you?
All over the world, the companies are affected from the COVID pandemic. We have been affected just about 2 months of the first year of COVID pandemic, which means 2020 February, 2020 April and May. Because the companies here are really the part of the global trade, and we are a supplier of the global market. That's why the companies here started to recover the production very early June 2020, and they are growing their business even much ahead of 2019, which is before COVID. This shows again that the companies producing technological products, they are always ready to start, even if it is affected by the crisis like COVID. And now we finished in 2020 very close business volume of 2019. 2019 was very good year all over the world. That's impressive. Even this year, we are much better. Yeah, thank you. Even this year, we are much better than 2019.
I want to ask about another topical piece in the news, a bit of headline here. There's talk from the G7 about a global corporate minimum tax. Now, do you guys worry about the potential pressure from some of the world's most wealthiest nations to up taxes? That's a key bit of important advantage that free zones can offer.
So that's a very good question. We are working and studying what's happening so far. I think the understanding now, they are talking about the G7 economies, and will be expansion, of talk, to come to the World Trade Organization and others. But to be frank with you, it all depends on how it will be implemented. So the mechanism is not clear yet. International companies or global companies anyway will have a different operating location and the platform, serving different jurisdictions. So in our location here in the GCC, for example, or in the region, you get my point, it's not clear yet how this will be implemented and how this will impact the global companies. So let's wait and see. We are working, to be frank with you, and we are interested to learn more. We are seeking clarification, and we will work with our companies to really, enhance their business environment. But the tax is not everything. So to be frank with you, why companies come here and there to establish, they are looking for advanced regulatory regime, which we are offering. They are looking for connectivity, and logistic offering. So the tax is one component. Yes, it's important, but not everything. So when companies decide to expand their operation, they are really considering multiple things, including the workforce and other, incentive or, elements before they open an international operation.
So uncertainty, but not deep cynicism, let's say. Farouk, do you think of things the same way? And we're running out of time, so just quickly here.
I agree with Minister. When we ask the investors here coming to free zone, the tax advantage is the number 5 in their decision making. There are other reasons, as Minister indicated, to choose the free zones, not only the tax issue. The most important thing here in the world is the inflation, I believe.
Farouk Goulair, Excellency Minister Ahmed Al-Sayed, thank you so much for joining us today. A very interesting discussion about free zones in the global world post-pandemic. Thanks, guys.
Pleasure, Simon. Thank you very much for hosting us, and wish you all the best in Qatar Economic Forum.
Hello, I'm Hasina Ahmed of Bloomberg Television. The pandemic has hit global investment flows. FDI slumped more than 40% in 2020, and such a low level has not been seen since the 1990s. Despite optimism about a global economic recovery, FDI flows may still be in question with the uncertainty of how COVID-19 will play out. Let's get insights, perspectives from our speakers. His Excellency Sheikh Ali bin Walid Al Thani, CEO Invest Qatar, Lord Jerry Grimstone, Minister for Investment, Department for International Trade and the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the United Kingdom. Your Excellency, let's start with you. We know that Qatar is looking to transform and diversify its economy. What are the key investment areas as you look to the future? Because we know that your recent MOUs with Russian entities, for example, the sectors include the likes of agri-tech, cybersecurity, education, IT. Are these your priority areas?
Thank you very much. And at the outset, I'd like to thank Bloomberg for hosting me. And, as you mentioned, the pandemic represents a challenge globally. The UNCTAD expected a 40% decrease in global FDI inflows. In Qatar, we very much beat that benchmark. I think in the last quarter of 2020, we had a positive inflow of around $500 million US. In terms of, and as you mentioned, the reform agenda of Qatar, economic diversification is at the center of that. We very much look at areas to diversify away our economy from the hydrocarbon, while also building up adjacent industries. Food security is very much important. Resiliency is the overall theme of the Qatar economy, its ability to withstand external shocks, and building up resiliency in terms of food security, on logistics, in diversifying our supply chain, and also in terms of water security. There's many adjacent opportunities to these sectors, and we prioritize them. Now, additionally, we very much look at the emerging trends in terms of digitally dominant experiences in healthcare, and especially in the field of telehealth. There's many emerging startups, and a lot of companies look to Qatar to scale up and to expand in the region in this particular sector. In cybersecurity as well, we have the World Cup upcoming, and a lot of opportunities around cyber emerged. We also look towards sports and sport tech and media as well. So that, in a nutshell, is very much our priority sectors. And also we're very much agnostic in terms of how we welcome investors and which sectors are open to them. Qatar is very much a liberal economy. So we very much, prioritize our sectors based on overall emerging trends and themes. And here's where we see the opportunity.
Lord Grimstone, the UK has seen a drop in investment from countries like Japan, for instance, is now having to fight it out with Germany, with France for that investment flow. Has the appeal of the UK as an export base been impacted by Brexit? What are your numbers telling you?
I was very pleased. Well, thank you for the question. I'm very pleased to be here today. I was very pleased to see last week that the EY survey, having surveyed a lot of investors, did find out that the UK is the most attractive investment destination in Europe. Of course, in the run-up to the end of last year, there was a lot of uncertainties in the UK. People didn't know how Brexit would turn out. But I think that uncertainty having been removed is making us a very attractive investment destination, which is good. But of course, the position that we're all in, and this goes for my great friends in Qatar as well, attracting investment has become a globally competitive sport. And to attract investment, you have to be match fit, you have to understand what the investors want, and you have to coincide that with national objectives. So I'm very positive about going forward, but of course we are dealing with a completely different world post-pandemic than the one we had grown up with as recently as a couple of years ago.
Quantify that optimism for us, Lord Grimstone. What kind of numbers are you anticipating for 2021?
I don't want to give a forecast because sometimes investments come through quickly, some they don't. Our pipeline has never been more active than it is now. It's very interesting what investors are looking for. I think the move towards net zero. We've got the United Kingdom in pole position on that. We've got COP26 later this year. We will be net zero by 2050. That's throwing up enormous investment possibilities. I would say life sciences. I think people have seen what's happened in life sciences since the pandemic started, what's happened on vaccines, a lot of interest in investing in life sciences. The tech sectors, as always, very attractive to investment. And then, of course, infrastructure. This country needs more infrastructure. Very, very grateful to our friends in Qatar, who have invested in that. Very happy for their investments in property, which they've made. So it's an interesting time. And whenever you get change in the world, as great as we've seen in the last 2 years, the pandemic, net zero, that throws up enormous opportunities for those who are willing to take them.
Your Excellency, talk to us about Qatar's new PPP plan or PPP law. How does it boost the country's value proposition to investors?
Very much we believe that private-public partnership is essential, especially in an economy like Qatar. When we look at investors and what they look for, we come down to three main kind of factors. One is sound economic situation. The second is fiscal and monetary predictability. And the third is effective and efficient government. Now, given Qatar's small size and agility, we believe that creating partnerships, especially between the private and public sector, is essential to investor success. In the PPP program, and that is mainly structured around infrastructure projects like public schools, water sewage treatment, very much, we find this as a lucrative opportunity to anchor foreign investment in Qatar. We are now looking to expand this program across different sectors. And very much, we believe this is a lucrative opportunity and also an anchor for investors to base out and to then expand their operations in Qatar and to scale up and expand in the region as well.
Lord Grimstone, we know that China is increasingly an important source of investment for Britain, but China investment in the country at a 10-year low, a drop of almost 80%, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of political tensions over issues like Xinjiang. How are you looking to attract Chinese capital to Britain?
We have a very clear view of China. Of course, we very much welcome, trade and investment with China. But again, it's appropriate sometimes to express our views on some of the things that are going on, which we don't think are right. But we absolutely, welcome Chinese investment when it's in our mutual interest. The Chinese are sophisticated investors. I think they understand that, and we're getting, good trade flows, good investment flows still from there.
It is a balancing act sometimes, Lord Grimstone. There is uncertainty, for instance, about the proposed nuclear power station in the UK, which involves China's CGN, which has been blacklisted by the US. Has a decision been made on that?
We very much welcome the investment they're doing alongside EDF in our nuclear power stations. We've introduced last year a new national security and investment bill, which will come into effect later this year. I should stress that this bill is completely what we call actor agnostic, not aimed at any one country. But obviously it's right that if you're attracting investment, and it's a real priority of ours now to attract investment, you have to make sure that that investment is safe for your country. Makes good sense to do that.
Your Excellency, Qatar has seen rapid expansion, a Gulf metropolis, a transit hub, infrastructure spending in the lead up to the Soccer World Cup next year is estimated to be about $300 billion. What does it all mean for GDP growth this year, next year? Can it exceed the World Bank estimates of 3% growth this year, 4.1 in 2022?
Well, we aim to beat that. And, especially in the heart of our diversification efforts, foreign direct investment plays a large part. Qatar, very recently adjusted its legislation, opened up completely all sectors for foreign direct investment, and developed even new platforms to service and to register and license investors, such as the Qatar Free Zones Authority, which is a logistics hub very much tied to large infrastructure investments, such as the largest deep water port in the region, and also Hamad International Airport, which hosts the largest air cargo fleet in the region. So very much, there's opportunities that we look to expand upon around all the infrastructure investment that Qatar has undertaken. We very much look to build for the future, but now, as the construction and distribution sector recede in the coming, as the projects are finishing up and the World Cup is, gearing up to completion, we look very much to expand upon all the infrastructure investments that we've made and to develop adjacent opportunities around these assets.
Lord Grimstone, we know that you've been busy trying to forge trade deals. What's the outlook for FTAs to be signed over the next 6 to 12 months? We know that you suggested that perhaps that FTA with India is closer now than before.
Well, our strategy is to put the United Kingdom at the centre of a global network of FTAs, to make the UK a very attractive place to put a manufacturing centre in and to export from the UK. You've mentioned India. We're very enthusiastic about the prospects of a free trade agreement with the Gulf, both with the Gulf Cooperation Council and working with the individual countries in the Gulf. We see that as a great way of expanding trade and investment. We have applied for entry to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. that very important free trade agreement with 11 countries. Negotiations are starting on that. We have ongoing negotiations with New Zealand. A deal with Australia was agreed in principle just last week. And I think altogether now that we have agreed trade deals with 67 countries. So it's been a really important piece of work with us. But if through trade deals, we can increase trade and investment flows between ourselves and Qatar, I very much admire Qatar. I think the work that Qatar is doing on attracting investment is absolutely first rate. And if our free trade agreement will increase the flow of investment between our two countries and the trade between our two countries, there'd be nobody happier than myself.
Your Excellency, Minister Grimstone, just another question for both of you before we go, with a minute to go here. I want to touch on cryptocurrencies, which is front and center. We know that Qatar has said no to cryptocurrencies. I mean, I'm just wondering what your opinion is, how cryptocurrencies can come into the mainstream. Would it take coordinated regulation across borders for it to be an accepted investment? Your Excellency, your thoughts on that?
So, as you mentioned, I mean, we very much look towards the underlying technology that underpins cryptocurrency. So in terms of blockchain and fintech, Qatar has done a lot. We see the QFC adopt a series of regulations that helped grow fintech in Qatar. So we very much look, toward developing opportunities around that. Now, in terms of cryptocurrency, we see a globally emerging trend. Qatar has yet to take part in that, but that is very much on the radar.
Your thoughts, Lord Grimstone?
Very briefly, I don't play roulette and I don't invest in cryptocurrencies.
But what do you make of talk of greater regulation? Would that make cryptocurrencies more acceptable as an investment?
Well, look, seriously, obviously it's important that they are regulated. They have a place to play. But I think people, rightly, particularly people who don't really understand what it is they're buying into, it must be right to say to those people to be cautious.
Lord Grimstone, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure having this conversation.
This is David Malinga, Bloomberg Bureau Chief for East Africa, and I'm joined today by Dr. Mo Ibrahim, the founder and chairman of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Dr. Mo, has the pandemic further weakened the democratic landscape in Africa?
Yes, I think so. We were worried about democracy in Africa actually for some years. Probably you are aware, and many of our listeners are aware, that we had this governance index, which we publish regularly to monitor different aspects of governance in Africa. Things are improving really over the last 15, 20 years, but in particular, the issue of democracy and participation, this started to stagnate and to fall back actually in the last few years. The pandemic did not help. It somehow emphasized the autocratic instincts of some of our leaders, and there is also the global environment around us was not helpful because of what I'll call the rise of strong men across the globe. Actually, we can see a lot of those people around, and they're very tempting also for imitation by some of our guys. We had about 10, 12 elections in Africa last year. Was not really wonderful. We had seen bad elections in Uganda and in Burundi, and we see the claim on opponents and civil society. Some leaders used also the pandemic to ban and restrict the opposition. We see a number of presidents extending their terms beyond the constitutional limits. So yes, unbalanced, things deteriorated actually.
And just on the health challenge itself, Dr. Mo, it looks like the pandemic has really laid bare, the fact that Africa's health system has been so much dependent on foreign assistance. Is it time for governments to really, invest in Medicare on the continent strongly? And should they also be looking at doing the same for, other sectors that are vulnerable to protectionism? And here I'm thinking about things like food security.
You're absolutely right, David. What is clear, we were caught short. Our expenditure on the health, which is a very essential public good, is very small, at 1.9% of our GDP, which is well below the 5.9% average for other regions. So we're not spending much money on health. Only 10, 12 countries do have free universal health care for their citizens. We don't manufacture medicines or vaccine. 98% of our medicines and vaccines are imported. So there is a number of shortcomings there which has been exposed in the way we try to deliver that very important public good.
And the other thing that the pandemic has also, really laid bare is the digital divide. And that has been most pronounced in Africa's education when you compare to, kids who are going to school compared to their peers in the developed world. Should government be putting as much emphasis in bridging the digital divide the way they did for financial inclusion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, David, I mean, this pandemic exposed really the huge divide. Our kids lost about 28 weeks of education, of school days, and that's probably the world average. But our kids, either because they don't have internet access or because they don't lack laptops or missed out. So we lost 1 year, one valuable year for our kids was lost. That is a huge blow for us. Add to that the future path for us really depends a lot also on the digital economy, because that's one area where Africa really need to invest and work on now, the digital economy. And we need really to improve our access to the internet and to try to provide really a better service in that area, because that is painful.
Yeah, and Dr. Mo, we'll just end with where we started off, just in half a minute. By and large, is the quality of leadership in Africa worsening, or is it improving? From your vantage point over the years you have been doing the governance index, please tell us.
Well, we're very delighted that our prize committee did propose a winner this year. Not every year we find a winner. President Youssoufou of Niger was the worst winner. That's a good sign. But that's one country out of 54 or 55 countries. What I really believe that it is going sideways, really. In some countries, it's going backward, and there is a problem. I mean, there is this copycat strong men who stay in power and change the constitution, overstay their period. We have presidents who have been there for 30 years, 32 years. We have a president in Cameroon, we have a president in Equatorial Guinea, we have a president in Uganda. Those guys have been there for over 30 years. I mean, that is, come on, you go stale after that. So we need to do a lot of work there. We need statesmen, strong statesmen, not strong men.
Thank you, Dr. Mo.
Thank you.
I'm David Weston from Bloomberg News, and I'm delighted now to welcome Dalit Singh. He is Deputy National Security Advisor in the Biden White House. So welcome, Dalit. Great to have you here. The subject is the connection between the economy on the one hand and security on the other hand. We've seen that, I think, displayed in the G7 summit and then in the EU summit as well, just in recent days. Give us a sense of what the Biden administration was trying to accomplish with respect to the economy as well as security at the G7.
Yeah, David, glad to be with you. You're right. We've just come back from Europe, and we were at the G7, also Brussels. And, you know, the president likes to talk about this being an inflection point. We're at one of those historical moments in which a contest is playing out. You have some who think a top-down autocratic model is the best way forward. And there are others like us who are out to make the case that democracy and shared democratic values are the single best way to deliver results for our people and to meet the biggest challenges of our time. So that's what this moment is all about for us. And I'm happy to describe in some detail what we delivered.
Well, let me ask about that question very specifically, because the tone of this administration, I think it's fair to say, is quite different from that of the predecessor. You're much more multilateral. President Biden, from his experience, from his nature, really wants to get together with allies and get a consensus going. When you go to a G7 and they say, okay, that's nice language, what are you doing? What did you get accomplished? What specifics came out of it?
Yeah, so look, there's no bigger challenge right now that requires collective action than COVID. So, you know, when he first came into office, President Biden launched a wartime effort to defeat the pandemic at home. We've had a lot of success in doing so. Cases are down over 90%. Deaths are down over 85%. Millions of Americans are getting back to living their lives. But you're right. The question is, what can we do together with our allies and partners to end the pandemic across the world, knowing it knows no borders? And that was the basis for our announcement last week. We, the US, put forward 500 million donations of Pfizer vaccine to the 100 lowest income countries in the world. And importantly, this donation was made without any conditions, no strings attached. The sole purpose was trying to save lives. It was the right thing to do. So by making that donation, we mobilized our G7 partners. They matched our pledge. So we now have over 1 billion doses we're giving to the world. The poorest countries of the world, again, with no strings attached. And it's not just about vaccines, it's about boosting manufacturing capacity, easing some of the distributional and storage bottlenecks, and trying to put a definitive end to the pandemic that's raging across the world.
One of the things that we learned about at the G7, at least I learned about the G7, was the Build Back Better for the World plan, which is really to help with infrastructure and other aid around the world globally. And I do understand it to be, in part, an alternative to One Belt, One Road coming out of China. What was the reaction from our allies to that?
Yeah, and I'll step back here as well, David. I mean, look, we came into the G7 from a position of economic strength, and our goal was, how can we broaden that globally? So we've gotten ourselves on track for the fastest GDP growth projection this year in the past 40 years. The unemployment rate is likely to drop from a high of over 14% to under 6% very soon. And we're on track to get back to the pre-pandemic peak by 2023. That would be 7 years faster than after the 2009 recovery. So the idea coming into this G7 is how can we broaden that story globally? How can we strengthen it? And that's how the Build Back Better for the World idea came about, is how can we as a G7, the major democracies of the world, how can we put forth a high standards, transparent, climate-friendly alternative to the Belt Road Initiative? And it's for developing countries that have very large needs in terms of infrastructure broadly, climate, health, digital technology, and gender equality. So coming out of that meeting, we had enthusiastic endorsement of the concept. And our collective aim now is to amass hundreds of billions of dollars towards this goal. And so what you're going to see over the next few months is we'll put forth specific plans on where this money is going to go, how it's going to get raised, and how we're going to partner together to make it a reality.
It's fascinating. It's quite an initiative. Thank you very much for sharing with us. That's Mr. Dalit Singh. He is the Deputy National Security Advisor.
Hello, I am Jeanette Rodriguez, South Asia Managing Editor for Bloomberg News. And I have with me Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's Minister for External Affairs, to discuss a powerful new grouping in the world today: India, Australia, Japan, and the US, also known as the Quad. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go straight to our first question. It has been a year now since China and India clashed in the Galwan Valley, and multiple rounds of military and diplomatic talks have yet to resolve the issue. What role has the Quad played in informing India's response, and what level of support can it provide?
Well, first of all, Janet, let me say it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I think when it comes to Quad and the India-China border issue, we're talking apples and oranges. I'm not quite sure I'd really, see a tight connection there, because I'll tell you why. The Quad is 4 countries who have come together on a common agenda, and the agenda, it includes maritime security, it includes connectivity. In the last year, it's included vaccines, even education. So they have their own agenda. They've got a sort of a set of convergences, a worldview. They meet and they talk about a whole lot of things. Now, the India-China border issue, it has pre-existed the Quad. In many ways, it's a challenge, a problem which is quite independent of the Quad. And there are two big issues there right now. One, of course, is that the close-up deployments still continue, especially in Ladakh. The issue there is whether China would live up to the commitments it has made, written commitments it has made about both countries not deploying a large armed force at the border. And the larger issue really, whether we can build this relationship on the basis of mutual sensitivity, mutual respect, and mutual interest. So I do see why you're interested in both the issues, but I would urge you to look at them somewhat independent of each other.
Minister, pulling back a little bit from the Quad, specifically more to the G7 grouping. Recently, the G7 agreed on a 3-pronged approach to Beijing, which is basically cooperate on issues such as climate change, compete on trade and supply chains, and disagree on human rights. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of this approach on the larger global stage?
Look, again, we were there at the G7 summit as one of the 4 countries who were invited as a guest. Obviously, there are issues with which, we are in agreement with G7, some more, some less. There'll be issues where we would have a different viewpoint. Now, today, generally in international relations, considering that the world is much more fractured, it's much more multipolar, it's much more rebalanced, you will have this mix of where you compete, where you cooperate, how much do you cooperate, and when you look at the specific issues you mentioned, for example, climate change, obviously there is a G7 and China conversation, if you would, but we are actually in a very different position because we are at a much earlier stage of our development. Leave alone, a net zero year, we are not even there in terms of identifying a year of peaking. So our positions are much closer to many of the other G77 countries, the developing world countries. When it comes to an issue like supply chains, I think there, obviously we share with G7 the importance of having more resilient and reliable supply chains. But we also feel that, we can contribute to it by expanding our own manufacturing capabilities. And in fact, one of the big initiatives of the Modi government is something called the PLI scheme, which is designed to attract more manufacturing into India. On issues, on open societies, on democratic freedoms, there I think there is a much stronger convergence with the G7, which is why we actually had a statement to which we subscribe. So it's uneven, but that's the nature of the world today. You work with different countries on different issues, and it's a far more issue-based relationship that we are seeing in world politics.
Minister, coming back to the issue of building infrastructure, how does India plan to participate in the G7's Build Back Better World initiative? This, of course, hopes to narrow the $40 trillion infrastructure investment deficit needed by developing nations by 2035. Could you share something about how India plans to participate in this venture?
Well, you know, the B3W initiative is a G7 initiative. We've had our own development partnerships for many years before that. In fact, you know, we are today, in terms of the development projects that we do in the world, we are doing projects in as many as 62 countries. And we have actually signed up to, I think, something close to about 630 projects. And about more than half of them, 340, have actually been done. So there is a history in India for, you know, where projects and development partnerships are concerned. And in fact, I can give you an example. I was in Kenya last week, and, you know, people there, the government there, the president there was talking about a textile plant called Rivatex, which we had just revived. And as I look around the world, I mean, you go, say, Afghanistan, we built probably the only dam which has been built there in the last 40 years, close to, in a place called Salma. We built the Afghan parliament. In Sri Lanka, we did a lot of refugee housing for refugees. In Mauritius, we've actually built the Metro Express. It's a very successful project. In Ethiopia, we built sugar plants. In Mozambique and Tanzania, we've done a lot of work on water. So we've had a history of connectivity infrastructure projects. But what we share with the G7 is that today it's important to have broad principles that such projects should be viable, they should be transparent, they shouldn't contribute to debt, they should be environmentally friendly. Most of all, they must be a priority of the community where they are located. So it's an area where we do feel, you know, there's a lot of convergence with the G7. We look forward to working with them. But as I said, we have a substantial portfolio of projects which we have already done in the last years, and which I expect to see us continue to do more in the coming years.
Minister, you'd also mentioned that part of the mandate of the Quad is vaccines. Coming back to the situation at hand, of course, the pandemic, could you throw some light on your recent visit to Washington? I'm specifically asking about where does the discussion stand on procurement of vaccines for India and also the raw materials to prepare these vaccines in India? Has the US made any concrete promises?
Well, Janet, the big issue today for vaccines is the world doesn't have enough vaccines. Okay. Now, the patents is one part of it, but the production is the other part of it. And you know, in India, we are producing the AstraZeneca vaccine under license. We are producing our own vaccine called Covaxin. There are 6 other vaccines which are expected to come on stream in the coming months, starting with Sputnik. Now, the challenge in vaccine production is that if you are looking at the kind of scale which the world needs, which is not just vaccinate now, but plan to do it regularly, you know, look at booster shots when they come, you're not going to get that kind of scale without India scaling up. So the particular point of discussion for me was how do you keep the supply chain going so that we actually can ramp up production to the kind of level that the world needs. Now, why was it important for me to do that in Washington? Because a lot of the supply chain originates in the US. A lot of it comes from Europe as well. So I think if the US and Europe need to step forward, if India has to ramp up its own production. Now, you've seen, you know, our own outlook there. When we started production, Just as we rolled it out at home, we were living up to our obligations with the COVAX. We were supplying to some of our neighbors because we genuinely believe that, as they say, no one is safe till everyone is safe. Now, when the second wave hit us, obviously we looked to purpose the deployment of vaccines primarily at home. But I'm quite confident as the production picks up. Again, we do see ourselves playing a global role, and it's important
Minister,
if we are to do that. Yeah, that we get the
Minister,
supply
thank
chain.
you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you very much. I'm cognizant that we're already over time a bit. Thank you very much for this conversation, Minister Jaishankar.
Thank you. Take care.
I'm David Weston from Bloomberg News, and we're delighted now to welcome General David Petraeus. He, of course, is a former head of the CIA, as well as former head of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan and in Iraq. He is now a partner at KKR. So, General, thank you so much for joining us today. The subject is the new security paradigm. We've heard a lot about security in recent days involving Europe, from the G7 to NATO to the Putin summit with President Biden. But the one thing that was not in the room was China, which may be, in fact, the largest issue in the security paradigm. Give us a sense of how important China is right now for the United States and therefore globally when it comes to security.
Well, thanks, David. Great to be with you and great to be with this event. Look, the most important relationship in the world by far is that between the U.S. and China. And it's not just for our two countries, it is for the rest of the world as well. And with respect, China was not in the room, if you will, during the G7 and the EU and the NATO summits, but it got mentioned in each of those communiques. So clearly China is on the mind of everyone. Everyone wants to see the U.S.-China relationship and indeed the relationships of other countries and blocs with China be as mutually beneficial as is absolutely possible. But obviously, there have been cases of quite considerable competition, indeed, to a degree, confrontation. And in fact, the individual who oversees the Indo-Pacific region, as it's described now for the White House, recently said that the era of engagement is over and the era of competition has arrived to characterize the U.S.-China relationship. My sense is that the new U.S. administration is putting together, first of all, getting its own house in order, combating the pandemic, getting the economy going again, bringing the country together, then reaching out to all of our allies and partners and friends around the world, make sure they're all on side to renew U.S. leadership and the value that the U.S. places on alliances, on partnerships, and on allies, and then to craft a coherent, comprehensive whole of governments with an S on the end, all the capabilities, not just of the US, but of our partners and allies as well, to try to influence China, in particular, to avoid real confrontation, and ideally to influence decision-making in Beijing on certain issues involving trade and economic interaction, how each country interacts with the world, with international organizations and so forth and so on. And I think, frankly, the administration is off to a good start. And by the way, I am a true non-political person in the United States and advise members of either political party and served in two senior positions, each for a Republican president and a Democratic president.
General, when you talk about competition, I think of economic and military, and they necessarily overlap, but there is some difference between them. How would you assess the relative importance of the economic competition as opposed to some of the military issues?
Well, I think it's huge because, again, it's your economic power, if you will, that is the foundation of your national power. It's what enables you to raise and support an Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, space, and so forth. It's what gives you, again, the influence in many different quarters around the world. And so, again, I think rightly, the new administration has said foreign policy truly does begin at home in this case, especially given the challenges of the pandemic. The U.S. is well on the way to cornering it, if you will, and driving way down the number of cases and so forth with an aggressive vaccination campaign, equally aggressive fiscal support for economic revival. You can see, I think, the economy roaring back. In fact, now the concern is inflation rather than, inadequate growth. And then it's about, of course, just the sense that the country is together. If you have all of that, you have a very strong foundation upon which to build and to project your activities around the world. But let's make no mistake about it. The reason the U.S. can spend in recent years $740 billion on defense is because of that economic strength, the revenues that come from that, and also the capabilities that are derived from an advanced economy when it comes to the cutting edge tools and implements for defense policy and forces.
General Petraeus, President Trump certainly had a lot of policies, particularly on the economic sphere with respect to China. There now is a review going on for a lot of those policies by the Biden administration. Give us a sense of where you think the Biden administration should be heading, and particularly, if I could ask, how much of this is national security related when it comes to trade? Because there's some trade that perhaps has little direct effect on national security. There's some that we've seen, particularly in the technology area, that has a lot.
Well, I think we have to acknowledge that the Trump administration very much changed the conversation when it came to China. And I think by and large, that change reflected a bipartisan consensus in Washington and indeed throughout the country that perhaps the U.S. had not been firm enough in the past with China. And it appears that the new administration, someone recently characterized the approach as to remain firm or hard, but do it with allies and partners. And I think that's a reasonable characterization. Certainly, all of the eaches are being re-examined. Do all the tariffs need to stay in place? Do the entities list, which in many cases our technologies are not being sold overseas, that can then be used in adversarial military force, also has to do with 5G. As you know, and concerns about whether if you have a Chinese 5G company that would enable some kind of intelligence. The initiatives of the previous administration will stay in place.
At the G7, we heard about China. As you say, they weren't in the room, but boy, they were talked about. And one way when you talk about really building our relations with our allies.
I'd love to see us go back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Promoted the Trans-Pacific Partnership only to coming back to that in the first 2 years of this administration to what was then called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and had much more importance as very, very important. And as you look at, again, this facets, and I have also supported this publicly, is at least we ought to be in the arena competing, providing an alternative to countries when they are trying to carry out their own infrastructure development initiatives, and an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. So that funding, there should be a competition, there should be a corollary. And in fact, if you put together the International Development Finance Corporation money, which was doubled by the Trump administration, the assets of that, our AID budget, the development budget, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, then you bring in the UK's DFID and Japan Development Agency. If you gather all of the partners and allies together, then you have, I think, quite a good, healthy competition. And again, all we can ever ask is to be able to compete. And I think that would be healthy for the countries that are pursuing these infrastructure initiatives. I think it will be healthy actually for what China is doing. And let's be fair that China has been examining its experiences with the Belt and Road Initiative, and it has actually been making changes to how it goes about what it does in response to what have, I think, in some cases been legitimate criticisms or lessons learned. So I applaud the initiative that was announced in this regard, and I hope we will see it can propel this forward, and again, provide an alternative, a competitive
Petraeus of KKR, really a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time today. It was truly helpful.
We hope the discussions on power and trade flows have illuminated what you care about most. But given the state of the planet, climate change may well pose an even bigger threat to not just trade flows, but our very survival. We turn next to sustainability, the topic that occupies the waking moments of many of our brightest brains.